Okay, Madam Chairman, we're ready.
Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the House Labor, Health and Social Services Committee meeting. We are January 20th, 2021, and welcome aboard to our new session of wonderful and great things, I hope. We're on a slightly different platform of Zoom, so those of you who have been with us all interim, hopefully there won't be too many tweaks or quirks, but that's as it may be. I'm sure that if nothing else in 2020, we learn to be flexible. So Carla, I think the first thing will be just if we would call the roll, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Clifford.
Here.
Representative Conley.
Here.
Representative Flitner.
Here.
Representative Ottman.
Present.
Representative Romero Martinez.
Present.
Representative Stivar.
Present.
Representative Wharf.
Present.
Representative Stivar, are you there?
Present.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Hallinan
Here.
and Chairman Wilson.
Here.
Madam Chairman, everybody is present.
Thank you. So before we start, I'm just going to remind people a little bit of the tips from the virtual guidelines. I'm reading off of a paper here, more or less. Just a reminder that we should mute our microphones by default and only turn them on when speaking, but then you have to remember to turn them on. If you want to talk, make sure your video's on, raise your hand. Because there are only 9 on our committee, if you just put your hand up like this, high enough up in the air, that should enable the chairman to see you, wait to be recognized. And remember, just a reminder, our temporary rules are that you have to have your video camera on to vote, and really you should have your video camera on all the time. Let's see, oral, I'm just going down the list. For oral votes, make sure your video's on, raise your hand, so that's the ayes and nays. If there's a roll call after Carla, who is, and welcome Carla, she's staffing for us today. If when she calls your name on, if you have been muted, turn your microphone off. And now it does say on this paper that you should say representative, your name votes yes or no. Is that what you want, Carla?
That is correct. Thank
Okay.
you, Madam
So if we're
Chairman.
having a roll call, when she calls Wilson, then I say Representative Wilson votes yes or no, whatever it is. When we take a break, which we'll just, I don't think we need one until the inauguration. That's not that far down the road. Then we'll break, as I mentioned, from 9:50 until 10:40. We will take a break to enable people to watch the inauguration if they wish to do so. Let's see, I'm just checking about the reminders. I think as far as testifying and that sort of thing, those who have registered got their instructions, and hopefully we will manage to bring you in from attendee to panelist and manage to do that okay. All right, that's more or less it. Okay, so we have 3 bills on the agenda today. House Bill 4, Mental Health Professions Practice Act, House Bill 3, Certified Addictions Practitioners, and House Bill 38, Community Behavioral Health Priority Populations. So just to let the public know, first of all, why we did 4 and 3 out of order is because the Mental Health Professions Practice Act is a little bit more substantive and has some of the definition changes. And so we figured that would be the lay the groundwork, as it were. And then House Bill 3, the Certified Addictions Practitioners, just has a few specific things for that, like that certification area. House Bill 38, because that is longer, what our intention is today is to, we'll take public testimony on that bill, and maybe from some legislators or the agencies, but we are not actually going to work or try to amend that bill today, because it was the feeling of leadership that that bill is just a little bit too substantive to try to deal with in a virtual floor session next week. So we're going to hold that off for floor consideration until we get to the in-person session starting March 1st. So I figured we may as well just consider that bill a little closer to the time when we'll be gathering together. But because it's been posted, and certainly people will, I think, because we have so many new members on the committee, if we have testimony today, that'll give us just more time to consider it and understand it. Okay, so let's see. Those of you who are new, as you know, House Bills 4 and 3, well, and 38, we've been working on during the interim. In fact, the House Bills, the topics of House Bills 4 and 3, really this committee's been working on for about 3 years, I would say. Isn't that right, Representative Hallinan and Stivar? I think we've been working. So I have to say, I think we've reached the point where we've got them pretty well pinned down. And so I will, what we are going to do, committee, I'm going to present the two bills, 4 and 3. Vice Chairman Hallinan will call on you if you have questions. And then when we're done presenting the bill, then I'll take that over for as far as motions and going through amendments. Okay, so House Bill 4, Mental Health Professions Practice Act amendments. And I'm going to give some background on these just because we've got, as I say, so many new people. So, and some is even more than the new people. That is to say, we have people new to the legislature and people who are just new to the committee that might know some of this. So most of our professions in Wyoming are licensed or certified in some way through a licensing board. This bill deals with the professions under the purview of the Mental Health Licensing Board, which are professional counselor, marriage and family therapist, clinical social worker, and addictions therapist, which are licensed. These people have masters or doctorates. And then we have a certification category for social workers and addictions practitioners. Those are people with bachelor's degrees. So that's who we are talking about here. So if you look on page 1, just the act, it's actually doesn't cover that many things. You can see it in the enacting statement there, providing for criminal background checks, standards for certification as certified mental health worker, and the scope of practice for that, amending reciprocity. That's basically the 3 things. So the bottom of page 1 just has all of the places where those are taken care of. Turning to page 2, the red language on page 2 puts in a requirement to do background checks. And frankly, if we do nothing else with this bill, personally, I think this is so key. We have somewhere around 30 professions in Wyoming where to be licensed or certified in that or to work in that agency or whatever, you have to have a criminal background check and be fingerprinted. And for some reason, that has never been the case with the people in the mental health field. And I have to say, just speaking as a former psychologist, well, I was a psychology major, but the clientele of this profession is probably one of the most vulnerable population as far as the potential for abuse. And further, the client provider relationship, it's typically one-on-one. Most anything else, if you're in the operating room or a physical therapy rehab unit, wherever you've got a lot of people around, it's almost always the case, except for group meetings, but where you have one-on-one meetings between the mental health provider and the client. So I just think it's really a very bad thing that we have not required background checks and fingerprints for this profession. So that's all. Page 2 just adds that in. It's kind of lengthy because you have to authorize the criminal records people to give the records, and then you have to authorize the board to receive it. That's why it's in a couple of places. Okay, page 3, we are inserting a definition for a certified mental health worker. And the reason we're doing that, this is not actually, it's not really a new thing, and I think we'll probably get some testimony from the board on this. The only place this job was previously in statute, or is in now, is in 3338-106M, which is one of the repealers. And the reason it was repealed is because that whole repealer section dealt with people who had been practicing for 2 years before 1997. Shows you how long that whole thing was in there. Well, obviously that's irrelevant at this point. Those that time period is long gone. But this is a certified mental health worker is a person who has a bachelor's degree and basically works in sort of I hesitate to call it an entry level, but a basic assistant mental health type worker in a variety of fields and a variety of offices. So they obviously want the job category to continue. So this is just really inserting something that went out in the repealer. And then on page 3, line 16, we're inserting a definition for human behavioral discipline. There are several of these job categories where, rather strangely, and I have to think that this must have been a holdover from, I don't know, the 90s or something, they said that people should have human resource degrees, which at least nowadays, most of us associate human resources with the personnel office, right? I mean, the HR people. That is not at all the field that we want these people to be studying in. And the board had dealt with that by rule. They said, okay, a human resource discipline means this and so, but really it'd be better to have it right in statute. So I worked with the various providers in this field, and we came up with, and worked it over the, in the interim committee as well, a definition for what human behavioral disciplines are. And you can see this is pretty much covers whatever a person might major in to have a bachelor's degree or subsequent degrees in these areas. Lines 17 through 18, addictionology, chemical dependency, substance use disorder, counseling, psychology, social work, sociology, or a related field. So pretty basic, but just that's why that's in there. Okay, turning the page on page 4. Top of page 4, that's the insert from the bottom of page 3 about the board requesting. Page 4, here is the requirements for certification for the certified mental health worker. By the way, that's a subsection Q on line 8. If you can't, it's kind of hard to read if it's a Q or a G. That's a Q. And this was basically developed by those people. And this is typical in the licensure. They have to put on line 14, they have to send in an application, they have to have the fee, they have to furnish satisfactory evidence. I'm going down to the bottom, reach the age of majority. This is just replicating all sorts of other jobs. No felony convictions, except it allows them on the top of page 5 to grant an exception if consistent with public interest. In other words, that would probably, most likely be in, say, a substance abuse counseling. Often you might have a person in that field who has struggled with those issues earlier in life and perhaps has some sort of a conviction, but now has, turned around and is helping other people, and that allows them to be certified in that field if the board reviews what their situation is. And so we've got, starting on line 6, the baccalaureate degree in the human behavioral discipline. And again, that's where we put the definition in earlier. Standard exam as defined by the board. This is all pretty much boilerplate stuff. Top page, turning to page 6. The reciprocity component on page 6, I think, has been really valuable, because that's one of the issues that we've been really dealing with the last couple of years in the legislature and just in practice. There are a number of areas where we don't produce a lot of these type of providers in state, or we've got people coming in from out of state. There's been a situation with the prisons. And so what we're doing in this reciprocity work is really allowing more flexibility to the licensure board to encourage reciprocity, by recognition of people's work and expertise by reciprocity when they already have something elsewhere. So we have a reciprocity paragraph for licensees that's already in statute. That it's not in here, not because we're not doing it, because we're not changing that. So we're inserting on line 10 the mental health work into the reciprocity ability. Then paragraph D, for good cause shown, the board shall issue a license or certification for these areas: social worker, addictions practitioner assistant, or mental health worker who does not otherwise meet the reciprocity requirements. So in other words, show a cause, like there's a real shortage in this area, and that they're otherwise compliant. We're really encouraging that there, and I think the board is getting that. Then just top of page 7, we have some repealers. That whole section E through M was a whole lot of verbiage about licensing for people who had been employed in the state for 2 years before 1997. And that was put in when certain mental health laws were put in 1997 to basically grandfather them in. Obviously, at this point, that's so long ago that the people are well, into their new licensing. I mean, most licensures only last for a couple of years. So obviously they've been relicensed many, many times, and that part is no longer needed. I will point out just, and I don't know, being as we're not here with our paper assisting staff, you would have had to find this yourself. There is a fiscal note, but it is very small, and it's a positive, very small. Anticipated revenue increase fiscal year 2022, 6,000, and then some various 3,000 figures. And that is because the new certified mental health worker will have a $300 fee. And that basically matches with the other bachelor's level fees are $300 and the master's level fees are $350. So that you can just see that that's pretty, they're just explaining what would happen there. And I see no problem with that. So Mr. Vice Chair, I'm willing to stand for any questions. And I see I wasn't interrupted at all.
Does anybody have any questions for the chairman? Representative Flitner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Yes, Madam Chairman, if you would go to page 5 on lines 15 through 19, where it talks about in Romanet 4, the applicant has demonstrated knowledge in the field of mental health work in general by passing a standard exam, which may be written or situational as the board prescribes. Then it says this board may develop, adopt, and administer appropriate examinations. And I just wondered if that was that second sentence was necessary, or I'm just wondering, will they develop more exams? If you could just explain that for me a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Flitner. And that's a good question. And I hadn't actually noticed that sentence. This was, some of the work that they sent in. I would suspect that they are not going to want to be bothering to develop their own exams. That seems like a giant pain in the butt to try to have those be, verifiable type exams. I would, Carla, do we have, is Mr. Searles on from the board? My staff has gone away.
Madam Chairman, Greg Searles is in the attendees room. Do you want me to promote him?
Let's just hold off but we will have, if I may, Representative Flitner, let's ask that question again when Mr. Searles come in, because that is a good question.
Okay.
Representative Connolly, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Madam Chair, I am curious about if it's necessary to include psychiatrists as certified mental health workers. It seems to me probably no, but I am curious if there are any benefits that go to being a CMHW that we should also make sure that psychiatrists.
Mr. Vice Chair, so a psychiatrist is a physician and they practice under the Board of Medicine. So the certified mental health worker is a category of worker with a bachelor's degree. So I would think that the psychiatrists under the Board of Medicine would be, I'm not sure that there's a specificity on mental health questions. Certainly the Board of Medicine, as far as fingerprints and background checks, they already covered that.
Thank you.
I don't see any further questions, Madam Chairman.
Oh, here's one.
Representative Orff.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I apologize. This is probably something that the committee's already addressed, but I always wonder about the fees when we set fees. And I wonder how those fees align with other fees that are similar in nature. Just because I know sometimes fees can be kind of arbitrary and capricious. And I just wonder if that was looked at. I'm assuming it was, but I just want to ask that question if I could.
Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So the fees under the Mental Health Licensing Board are all parallel. As far as how the fees mesh with fees for other professions like realtors and dentists and such like, the only thing I can say there is I know licensure areas that have enough of their profession to be self-supporting and desire to be self-supporting sometimes have fairly large fees because the statute requires the board to pay for itself. The Mental Health Licensing Board is under ANI, and they are basically subsidized by general fund money, or their executive director does several different boards. And and Mr. Searles can probably answer more specifically to that. Typically, that is either because there are so few of those practitioners that the fee to be self-supporting would be onerous. He can probably answer that a little bit better.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the Madam Chairman? Representative Flitner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Just one last question, Madam Chairman, on the last page when it was talking about reciprocity, and it probably speaks to this within the entire statute, but I was just wondering if a reciprocal agreement was provided, and then is there ongoing requirements for continuing education for all of these providers once they've established their licensure?
Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So Representative Flitner, and again, Mr. Searles can probably answer this back, but once a person receives a Wyoming license under reciprocity, let's suppose they were coming up from Texas. So then the person has a Texas license and we've just given them a Wyoming license based on their compliance with Wyoming requirements by virtue of reciprocity. Then their ongoing Wyoming license falls under the same licensure requirements of any other person with a Wyoming license, which what the continuing education is for people varies by profession, but certainly all professions have continuing education requirements. And I would assume, and Mr. Searles can correct me if I'm wrong, but whether the person gets an initial licensure as a new graduate from Wyoming or comes in by reciprocity, I don't believe that they are treated any differently ongoing, but he could correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, Mr. Vice Chairman, it looks like we have certainly going to have questions for Mr. Searles. Why don't I take the baton back from you, Mr. Vice Chair? That way I'll give you a chance to ask questions as well. So we have, are there any, members, we have sort of a standard order of getting testimony. It seems like it's been so long since I've been in an actual committee room, I hardly remember how this goes. But if there are any legislators hanging out in video land, Zoom land, waiting to testify on this bill, any current legislators? Are there any of them, Jonathan?
Madam Chairman, I do not see any, but maybe you could ask them to raise their hand, their blue hand.
Oh yes, attendees, I forgot about that. I'm not used to this thing. Let's see. Nope, no one's. Okay, then we have state agencies. So I think we can consider the board to be a state agency. I see Mr. Johansson is here as well, but let's start. Oh, and Mr. Shannon is here too. Actually, but seems we had so many questions for Mr. Searles. Let's start with him, and then we'll get Mr. Shannon and Mr. Johansson from state agencies. I'm sorry, there's a few other, I don't think any of the other names, you know, with turnover, sometimes I don't recognize everybody, but Mr. Searles, welcome to our land of rectangles. Oh.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning, Mr. Searles. Have you been taking notes of all the questions for you?
I've been trying. There's been a long list. I'm not sure my hand can write that fast this morning.
Well, why don't you start with what you think you would like to say, and then if those of you who had questions that I said Mr. Searles will know better, if he doesn't answer them, then ask them again. Go ahead, Mr. Searles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee. My name is Greg Searles. I'm the Executive Director for the Wyoming Mental Health Professions Licensing Board. Our chair, Kelly Heenan, had planned to be here and was here, but had a session scheduled that she could not get out of at 9 a.m. and had to leave. So she asked me to answer these questions on the board's behalf. As far as the examination, Representative Flitner, the board does not intend to write an exam. There is an exam already written by the Center for Credentialing and Education. The board also uses their master's level examination for counselors. And the intent is to look at that examination in finer detail to ensure that that will meet the requirements for determining a minimum competency for the certified mental health worker. As far as fees go, Madam Chair, you were pretty well right on. However, the board does not receive any general fund money whatsoever. The only fees that we receive are from our licensees and the fees that they pay to become licensed, renewal fees, and then any other fee that they might have, such as a verification to another state and those kind of things. And as Madam Chair said, the board is required to keep fees at a level so that we are not in the red, but not in the black. The board does have a cash balance at this time. However, one contested case can easily wipe away any cash balance that the board has, as contested cases that are then appealed to district court and possibly even the state Supreme Court can turn very costly very quickly when it comes to expert witnesses and things like that. And that is the reason that the board does maintain a minimum cash balance. Renewals for reciprocity are handled exactly the same way as those that are licensed just in our own state. A mental health worker is required to complete 45 hours of continuing education every 2 years during their renewal period. All mental health workers' licenses expire on their birthday. So between their birthday every 2 years, they have to complete those 45 hours that are related to the scope of practice that include 3 hours of ethics and 3 hours of suicide assessment and intervention. And with that, I think I've answered the questions, but we'll stand for others.
Are there other questions for Mr. Searles? I don't see any. Well, very good. Thank you, Mr. Searles. I'm sure you will want to hang around. You know how we are.
I will be here if you need me, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right. Mr. Shannon, are you there? Can we let in Mr. Shannon?
Madam Chairman, I'm doing that right now.
Very good. Director Shannon, welcome. If you'll introduce yourself for the benefit of our new folks and the video viewers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Committee members, good morning. My name is Dan Shannon. I'm the Director for the Wyoming Department of Corrections. Thank you for allowing me to be in front of you today.
And do you have anything that you want to tell us about this bill?
I do not, ma'am. Madam Chair, I signed on for House Bill 38.
Ah, well, here I hauled you in. I caught a fish that I wasn't fishing for, I guess.
Well, it was a pleasure being hooked. I have no comment regarding this.
Oh, okay. Well, then I guess we'll let him go.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Maybe I should ask. Mr. Johansson, Jonathan, ask Mr. Johansson if he wants to testify on behalf of Department of Health, and if he doesn't, we'll let him continue swimming downstream for a while.
Madam Chairman, I can't talk to people in the attendees, but they could raise their hands if they want to indicate that they want to testify for this bill.
Let's see. I'll try that. If you are in the attendee room, please raise your hand if you would like to testify on this bill. I see the following names: Lindsay Simoneo, Andy Somerville, Bruce Birkland, Frank Craig, let's see, we have Kelly Heenan, I think she left, Cheryl Foland, and Stefan Johansson. So please just put up your hand if you want to testify. That would certainly clear it up. Good thought, Jonathan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I see 3 so far.
So far, they might have to find their little blue hand though. Stefan Johansson evidently doesn't want to testify, so that's okay. So then we will just start with people in order of which they had their hand. This is public comment, and the first name up is Lindsay Simoneo. Lindsay, welcome back. Extend her in, Jonathan.
restart. Yay!
And I apologize, I seem to recall that I am using some sort of different foreign language to pronounce your last name than the way you pronounce
Everyone,
it. Sorry about that.
everyone does. That is okay, Madam Chairman.
Well, it's not okay.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lindsay Semino. I represent the Wyoming Counseling Association. We stand in support of this bill. We are very excited to have both background checks and the certification of a certified mental health worker back in the state of Wyoming. We have been brainstorming the last several years of how do we increase the workforce when it comes to behavioral health in Wyoming, whether it is increasing different education opportunities. And we believe bringing back this certification is one of the ways to do that. This certification will be supervised by those who are at the master's level. And we believe that they will be able to serve as a great supporting role for those who are master level clinicians, and be able to support them in their work as they are burdened during this very critical time in this global mental health crisis. We also think that it will be able to anchor some of our young graduates that are graduating from the University of Wyoming in social work, in psychology, in these behavioral health fields, who may be graduating and then leaving the state, that they may be interested in picking up this certification and working while they figure out if they want to pursue a master's within the state of the University of Wyoming and what they would like to do long term. So we very much would encourage a yay vote on this bill. And as the chairwoman touched on, background checks are just imperative for our field. This is our most vulnerable population, whether it is with children, whether it is with the elderly. And so to make sure that those who are working with this incredibly vulnerable population are vetted is essential for the work that we are doing. So we encourage a yay vote today, and I stand for questioning.
Questions for Ms. Semino? I don't see any. Thank you. Are you going to, I may as well ask while you're here, will you also want to talk on House Bill 3 and perhaps later on 38?
We'll see. We'll see what happens.
I'll look for little blue hands.
I will hang out with my little blue hand. Thank you,
Very
Madam
good.
Chairwoman.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Semino. Okay, Andy Somerville. Jonathan, can you let her in?
Madam Chair, she's joining right now, I think.
Very good. Welcome, Ms. Somerville. Welcome to our new and, I won't call it new and improved, that doesn't sound very nice. Our new and wonderful committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good morning, committee members. My name is Andy Somerville, and I am here for WAMSAC, which is the Wyoming Association of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Centers. So essentially all your community mental health centers across the state. And Madam Chairman, I will be with you all day on all three bills. So I just have a couple very brief comments on this bill. My colleague Lindsay Semino touched on the majority of what I was going to say regarding education and keeping our people in the state. So in general, we are very supportive of this bill, especially the background checks. I can't underscore everything that's been said already. And I wanted to bring up something for potential future consideration. I don't have kind of a vetted amendment ready, but on page 4 of this bill, lines 1 through 3, the sentence reads right now, the board shall request criminal history background information on license or certificate applicants as authorized under 719-106A, et cetera. And the question that we have is, we understand that it might be the board's preference to start to do these on a renewal basis. So people that are already licensed that have never had a background check through the mental health board, it might make sense to catch those on renewals as they renew every 2 years for their license. And so we certainly would defer, Madam Chairman, to LSO, but to make sure that the board has that ability to request background checks on renewals and then potentially set any type of future schedule that they'd like to. I don't know if the conversation has been had yet on whether they would like to do those every 4 years, if they think one and done is enough. best standard practice seems to be to do those on a kind of periodic basis to check in to make sure that nobody has had any issues in the intervening. So I just wanted to mention that on this particular bill. But otherwise, I would encourage an aye vote and stand for questions.
Questions for Ms. Somerville? Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Somerville, do you have specific language that you think would better meet the needs that you just discussed in relation to renewals?
Ms. Somerville.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Conley, our initial thought was to keep it simple. So on page 4, line 2, where it says background information on license or certificate applicants, we thought that changing that to license, certificate or renewal applicants might meet that need and make it clear that the board had that authority. But again, I would defer to LSO or any suggestions from the committee on particular language.
Thank
We
you.
might ask Mr. Searles their thought on how that fits into their process. He never goes far. More questions for Ms. Somerville? Yeah, Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Don't you think that that line in this bill allows you to do this background, gain this background information on licensure or certification applicants as authorized? Don't you think that currently allows the board to do that by rule?
Ms. Somerville?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Hallinan, to be very honest with you, we are unclear on that. If we understand that it gives authorization clearly for initial licensure or certificate applicants, but we were unclear on whether that would authorize them for renewal as well. We would certainly, if the board, under the language that's written, if they can do that under rule and establish that schedule and have people do it on renewal, we're supportive of that process as well, whether it's in statute or in rule, however that needs to come about. We just want to make sure they have that authorization somehow to do that.
Well, after we get all the initial testifiers, we'll ask Mr. Searles to make a comment on that. And I'll just say, if he is not sure, committee member, this is the kind of amendment that we could easily run on the floor in third reading or even in the Senate, and then iron out on conference committee. I mean, seeing as we've all heard the issue, if we don't get the language and there seems to be a tweak through the process, I don't think that will end up being controversial, as far as that. Any more questions for Ms. Somerville? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Craig, looks like Mr. Craig wants to testify on this bill. Jonathan, can you let him in? Thank you. Morning, Mr. Craig. Welcome to our new and wonderful committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Frank Craig. I am the president for the Wyoming Association of Addiction Professionals. We are an affiliate of our National Association of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Counselors. I also am the state director for the Gateway Foundation and provide the institutional substance abuse treatment for the Department of Corrections. I did want to ask a question regarding background checks. As a professional that moved here from another state, I would say that the background check was a standard for our profession in the state of Texas and is typically a standard around the nation as well. But considering there are certain agencies that, like mine with the Gateway Foundation, that contract with the Department of Corrections, where that background check and a DFS check is a requirement to be employed to begin with. And I wondered if perhaps in a rule that would be considered as passing for the background check. Also, regarding the mental health worker, we're glad to see an expansion, to add for mental health professions and grow the workforce in Wyoming. I did wonder what the what the scope of practice would be for that particular certification, what they would be able to do or provide. Certainly understand under the supervision element. And noting some questions earlier when you were reviewing the bill, Madam Chair, and from my experience and with our association at the national level, I would just note that the fees in Wyoming for certification and licensure are some of the highest in the nation, understandably, because we're not a very high populated state. I'm certain that has a lot to do with that. But typically, like I've retained my license at the bachelor level in the state of Texas, and I only pay $125 every 2 years to have that renewed by comparison. So, but again, I'm not saying there's something that's really a bad thing in Wyoming, considering the population and the need to be able to pay expenses at the board level, certainly. For Representative Flintner, you were asking some questions about reciprocity. That's one of the biggest things that we've been working on in the past few years. I'm trying to get portability for individuals who hold similar licenses in other states and trying to grow the workforce. In my capacity as the state director for Gateway Foundation, we've attempted numerous times to recruit professionals from other states who come to Wyoming and have been practicing for years as substance use professionals and are unable to obtain even at the certification level, which has been very discouraging. We're hoping that, and I'll speak to the next bill as well for this certified addictions practitioner, but we're certainly hoping to see, at least from the national level for our association, recognition that the standards for education, experience, and training, which would be accepted in Wyoming, and thus being able to have that portability and reciprocity. I do believe that hopefully in an interim session, I know I've spoken with Andy and with the Social Work Association, certainly with the Counseling Association, to really try to get an overhaul of the entire Practice Act in the interim session. But these things are really necessary. I'm glad to see some language changes like human resources, for example, really just kind of updates the bill through these types of amendments. Thank you. With that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Craig. Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Craig, how much does it cost for the background check?
Mr. Craig.
Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, for what we do within the Department of Corrections, we pay a $10 fee at the state level to have not only a DFS check, but then the Department of Corrections, they actually handle the actual background check itself. That includes an NCIC background check and a national level as well. But we as an agency don't really pay for that. We just pay the $10 fee for the DFS check. That's the Department of Family Services.
Representative Hallinan.
I have a follow-up, Madam Chairman. Does that include the finger check or fingerprints and all the rest?
Mr. Craig.
Madam Chair, yes, Mr. Vice Chair, that's how it's conducted initially. Even to have access to the facility for an interview, for example, the NCIC background check is conducted through the Department of Corrections. If we were to entertain an offer to a potential candidate, that's when we would bring them back and they would have a fingerprint to run the national FBI background check.
More questions for Mr. Craig. Representative Stibar, was that a question? No, okay. More questions for Mr. Craig. I will say, so Mr. Craig, and we're gonna bring back Mr. Searle, so he may comment further on this. As far as what the work the certified mental health worker could do, and there's I think some components that are possibly outside of what's in the bill, but it looks to me like the mental health worker can actually work as long as they're under the supervision of a licensed supervisor, they can work in any of the fields that are under the purview of this. So counseling, social work type fields, addictions, anything that, so the field in which they could work is very broad. It looks to me from that. Seemed like there was something else that you brought up. I don't recall, but okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Craig. Look forward to seeing you again.
Mhm.
And Jonathan, can you bring, if Mr. Searles is, can you bring him back in? I
Yes,
suspect he's not.
Madam Chair, I'll do that. Madam Chairman, I'll do that right now.
We want to ask him about the renewal language. Hello again, Mr. Searles. You never get far. Probably you heard this conversation from Ms. Somerville on the top of page 4 as far as the background checks. Do you have any thoughts about whether the language as drafted would suffice to enable you by rule to just request the background information on renewal? Would you feel happier if we specified that? What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I have been listening. As far as the language goes, because there's even a question from WAMSAC that whether we do or don't have that authority, I think it would suffice to the board to make it clear that we do have that ability by including renewal in there. As most of you know, I'm not only the executive director for the Mental Health Professions Licensing Board, but I have 6 other boards that I'm the executive director for as well, including speech language pathology and audiology. And during the session last year, they were given the background check ability because of entering the speech language pathology compact. And in that bill, they did specifically make it clear that it was to be part of their first renewal once that bill went into effect for those to go under a background check. And to answer Representative Hallidan's question about cost for the background check, the Wyoming Department of Criminal Investigation charges $39 for the state and federal background check to be completed. As far as cost to do the fingerprints, that varies from location to location as to the individual law enforcement agency and what they charge to complete the 2 copies of the blue print card that are required to be submitted to Wyoming DCI.
I'm sorry, Mr. Searles, I was writing. What did you say how much that was?
It's $39 per person.
For the background check?
Yes. And then if the actual law enforcement agency charges to do the fingerprints, that's their own charge and varies from location to location.
Okay. Just as a question, Mr. Searles, so looking at that paragraph, if we were to amend it to say, the board shall request criminal history background information on initial or renewal licensure or certificate applicants, would that be good, or would you rather let us just kind of carry that as a thought for for a future amendment to pin that down?
Madam Chair, I think that language would be quite appropriate.
Okay, so I have that penciled down. Committee, when we work the bill, we might bring that in. That seems to be good. And it can, if we find out, those of you who are new especially, sometimes we amend things in committee and then by 3rd reading or the other chamber, we find out something else and change it around again. And that'll happen. That's okay. Okay, any last minute questions for Mr. Searles before I send him out to hover again? Because he knows he'll probably get called in once more, or twice, or 3 times. Representative Ottman.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I was wondering, Mr. Searles had said that where he is, that they don't run in the red or the black, that the cost of the fees for $300, that there is a balancing case of court cases or whatever. I was just wondering how large that that fund might be presently? Because $300 is a lot. I mean, this is my thoughts on it, and I was wondering, it's almost like an employment agency charge. And so that may well be common. So I was just wondering if I could have a little more information. Thank you.
Mr. Searles?
Yes, Madam Chair. The initial licensure fees of $350 for a master's level or $300 for a certificate level. And then the renewal fees of $125 for the master's levels every 2 years and $100 for the certificate level every 2 years. If someone would hold more than one master's degree level licensure, such as a counselor and an addictions therapy license, the second license is renewed at a lesser fee of $75. The current balance of the board, if you give me just a minute, I can give you an approximation of that. I just have to get to the right file. And I cannot find that file, of course, as I try to look in a hurry. But I'm going to guesstimate that it's right around $250,000 cash balance that the board has. But also prior to my time, by a long time, back in approximately 1995, the board had a case that went all the way to the state Supreme Court. And that court case, that single court case, put them in the red for over 10 years. Because it was so costly. And that's why the board tries to maintain a balance so that should it face another contested case that would go on like that and be so costly that we don't have to raise fees as time goes on and we can keep them at a consistent level.
I do think, you know, that, and I obviously haven't looked up, we have a lot of licensed fields, but I think these are pretty typical fees in Wyoming, and certainly some are higher. I think some are quite a lot higher. And as Mr. Gates pointed out, because we require these professions to basically be self-sufficient in their boards and not be subsidized by general taxpayer dollars, when you have a small population, obviously to carry you know, fixed costs of one, you know, I mean, if you have one person who's doing all the admin work spread out over, say, 3,000 people, that's more costly than in Texas, where there might be 300,000 of those type of people. You know, I mean, that is kind of the situation. Representative Worf.
Yes, Madam Chairman, I had a question for Mr. Searles. My understanding is the purpose of this is to try to encourage more people to come here and help fill a void that we need in the state. And I guess that's the question I have is that fee at such a level that it's actually going to be a deterrence or hinder people that may want to come here, but that fee could be something that would discourage that because that's my understanding is that's kind of the purpose of this is to encourage more people. So I guess that's the question that I would ask. I mean, I don't know what these positions pay. I'm assuming that they're pretty good paying positions. I just wonder if he would answer that question.
Mr. Searles.
Madam Chair, Representative Worf, I'm not sure that I have an answer for that for you. I'm not sure that the board has discussed that to be able to answer that question. I know these fees have been at this level for a long period of time now, that there have not been fee increases or decreases. So whether that would be probably a better question for the professional associations to answer than for the board from what they hear from their people than from what the board hears.
Thank you, Mr. Searles. You know, I would say committee, oh, go ahead, Mr. Worf.
Follow up. I was just wondering, Madam Chairman, if we heard what Texas charges. Is Mr. Searles aware of any other state what they would charge? I'm not sure what level this has been discussed prior to my participation, but I just wondered if he's aware of any other states and what fees they may charge.
Mr. Searles?
Madam Chair, Representative Worf, I know Mr. Craig referred to his renewal fee of $125 for 2 years, which is exactly what Wyoming is. Whether I don't know what their initial application fees are in Texas, but yes, I know there's a wide variety of fees. I know there's states with lesser fees. I know there's states with higher fees than Wyoming. But as Representative Wilson said, being self-sufficient, we have an office of 2 people, or we have 2 people working for the Mental Health Board that shares our time with 7 other professions, and trying to keep those fees down by having the staff in the Professional Licensing Board office that houses 20 boards to share the fees of the staff so that those fees are kept down the best that possibly we can.
Representative Worf, did you have a follow-up?
One last follow-up, Madam Chairman. I would ask then, I'm not going to bring an amendment to lower the fees. I thought about that, but what I would prefer is to maybe have someone, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate to have LSO do that background check, or if Mr. Searles has somebody in his office to do that. But I would like to have that answered, because I think it's problematic. We go to the process of creating this, but we still have the fees so high that it actually acts as a deterrent rather than an encouragement to get people here. I look at it, if it's a needed service, maybe we should be cutting those fees in half. But I don't want to bring that forward without that knowledge and background. So if you can help me obtain that information, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
So Representative Worf, what I would suggest rather than just have this be a one-off is under the Labor Committee, we have, I don't know how many licensed professions, 40 of them or something. I mean, physicians and nurses and physical therapists and all sorts of things. I think that might actually be a good interim topic as next summer, is to find out from all of the boards and professions what the licensure fees are, how many people are licensed, which boards are self-sufficient, which boards have to be operated under A&I. And I mean, I think that would be a good thing to look at as far as how that works. And because then it's really a policy decision for the legislature. If we think professions are in more need and it's worth spending general fund dollars to subsidize that, I think that should be, we might want to look at that more broadly. That would be my suggestion.
Well, and Madam Chair, I'm going to defer to you. You've been involved in this process much longer. I know that you said this topic's been discussed for several years, so I don't want to ball it up, but I just, that's something, if that's the direction you'd prefer, I'll follow that lead.
Well, I think that would be broader rather than just doing it for one mental health licensing category, and making that be different. We don't really know the ramifications of that, but I mean, I think it would make a great interim topic. And probably JAC would love to know as well. I know that all the boards come before JAC. I remember from my time in JAC. Okay, any more questions for Mr. Searles? Very good. Thank you, Mr. Searles, very much. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I see, let's see. So we have blue hands again from Ms. Simoneau and Mr. Craig. So I think that they may have put their hands back up for something because they were here and left. So Jonathan, why don't you see if Ms. Simoneau was wanting to add something? Ms. Simoneau, were you wanting to add something to a question?
Yes, Madam Chairman. In regards to the initial fee, from what we hear from our membership, I cannot speak for community mental health workers. I know that is something that Andy is currently working on, my colleague. But from what we have heard from our professionals who work in group practices, is that for new hires for group practices, what we have seen is that employers are paying that initial fee. that initial certification fee or licensing fee for those new hires, that they recognize that is something that they need for those new hires in order to bring them on for their businesses, to bring them on for those group practices. Similarly, they look at it as an overhead expense, similarly to their liability insurance as part of their overhead expense for their new employees. And so though we're not seeing it as a deterrent because the employers are taking that on when they are bringing on that new employee, and that is part of their overhead as a business expense. And so I wanted to clarify that up, that we are not seeing that as being an individual deterrent. And then I also wanted to clarify that is an initial fee. That is not something that we are bearing on a 2-year basis. That now, for example, whereas that was my initial fee 9 years ago, now that I am in private practice, I am paying $125 every other year, and it is not nearly a burden. I will be paying that joyfully in 3 weeks on my birthday. So yes, I wanted to clarify that for the committee and any other questions. But what that is the pattern that we see in group practices, that the employer takes that on for the new hire, recognizing that more than likely they are fresh out of school and that they do not have the funds to take that on themselves. So I stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Simoneau? And happy birthday, Ms. Simoneau.
In 3
Okay.
weeks. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Okay, let's hear from Mr. Craig. One last, and then I think we've probably got them all. Mr. Craig, you may have some further input. Mr. Craig, welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee, I just wanted to clarify for Representative Wharf's question that in my license in Texas, the initial fee for application is $145. But keep in mind too that as different states have requirements for examinations, that there are oftentimes additional costs associated with getting certification or license, and most of the time those testing fees, they can range anywhere from $250 up to $350 for the test setting. But the application itself in Texas is $145. And just to say, I don't mean to complain about the fee in Wyoming. Again, understandably, the sparseness of our population here may require, a higher additional initial fee. Certainly, that's understandable. Thank you, Madam Chair. And for that, I would stand for any additional questions.
Further questions for Mr. Craig? Okay, thank you. Very good. And let's see, is there, of the people on the attendee list, is there anyone else who wishes to testify on this bill? Seeing none, public testimony is closed. Do I hear a motion on the bill? Moved by Representative Connolly. Is there seconded by Stivar? Okay. Is there any discussion on the bill?
Question.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Connolly.
Madam Chairman, do you go page by page in terms of amendments, or is your question right now for amendments?
If there are any amendments, yeah, we can, and sometimes depending on how many there seem to be, I'll go page by page, but if we only have one, then we can just launch right to it.
Okay.
Does anyone have an amendment other than Representative Connolly? Representative Connolly.
Madam Chairman, on page 4, line 2, between the words on and license, add in initial or renewal.
Very good. The motion, is there a second? Seconded by Clifford. Okay, so the motion is on page 4, line 2, after the word on, insert initial or renewal. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, let's, if all in favor of that amendment, please nay. Aye, okay. 9-0. All right, that amendment passes. Okay, any other amendments? All right, then question on the bill. Carla, would you call the roll, please? And let's remind ourselves, because we haven't done it this way before, when your name is called, unmute yourself and say, Representative, your name, and then aye or nay. Representative Hallinan, do you have a question?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I have an amendment.
Oh, you got to be faster, Representative
I
Hallinan.
know.
What's your amendment?
The amendment is on page 2, line 20. All persons applying initially and every 4 years for licensure. And that is the amendment, Madam Chairman. Applying initially and every 4 years for licensure. And the reason for that amendment
Is
is,
there a second for discussion? Seconded by Wharf. Representative Hallinan.
the reason for that amendment, Madam Chairman, I think that having them go in for fingerprint checks every 2 years is too often. This bill doesn't say that it has to be every 2 years, but I think that is a possibility according to the way the bill is written. I think that the number of people applying for fingerprint checking is becoming kind of a burden on our police force and on our state government. So I think that every 2 years is probably too much, that every 4 years would be more appropriate. So that's why I made that change.
Any other discussion? Representative Hallinan, it would have been handy to have had this amendment so that we could hear from the board just in case. I mean, what if one of these jobs circulated every 3 years? I mean, we just need to, we can put it in and fix it later if necessary, but it would be helpful to make sure that that's, do you want the same language as what we put in on the, because we put in that the board shall request an initial or renewal. Now, understanding you don't want it to be on every renewal.
I think background information is probably less burdensome on the state than fingerprint checking. So that's why I just have it on that one lot on page 2. That's the only place I have that.
Representative Stivar.
Yes, Madam Chairman. I was just reminded that the jobs rotate and licenses is when they update them is every 2 years. So the 4 years would work great. So it's every other time they get their license renewed.
Okay, so Representative, let's just restate. So just make sure I have this written in correctly. All persons applying for licensure or certification. I'm just, where do you want to insert the every 4 years?
Well, Madam Chairman, all persons applying initially and every 4 years for licensure. So we go after applying and before 4.
Right. It just because we're not, we don't have our usual staff supporting our amendment writing. We need to make sure to give it to them exactly how we want it rather than have them expect to draft. So I think if we say all, let's see, and committee can feel free to throw in all persons applying for initial licensure or certification to the mental health, blah, 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 blah. Maybe we should put or every 4 years upon renewal. What do you think about that? So if we say insert the word initial before licensure and then maintain that whole section with the title thing and then put at the end or every 4 years upon renewal, does that get at what you're trying to say?
That would be okay.
Well, okay, reword it then for me.
Well, all persons applying initially for licensure or certification to the Mental Health Professions Licensing Board under Title 33, and every 4 years for reapplication for licensure or certification. I think the original wording is simpler, just saying it, applying initially and every 4 years for licensure or certification, just remains the same after that. I think that's simpler.
So you wanted to say all persons applying initially for licensure or certification to the
No.
mental health
No,
professions.
applying initially and every 4 years for licensure.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Applying
All
initially
persons,
and every 4 years for licensure.
all persons applying initially and every 4 years for licensure. Okay, got it. Got it. Okay, so everything in there after applying initially and every 4 years for licensure or certification, right?
Right. That's
Okay.
right.
Representative Stibar.
Yes, Madam Chairman. Getting some information in statute 3338-107 is where I believe that should go, renewing and licensing and continuing education in that statute.
Well, so here's the thing. We have two separate parts. The page 2, bottom of page 2 is the directions to the fingerprinting people. That's in Title 7, all right? That we're requiring those people to submit to fingerprinting. Then on page 4, on the top of page 4, those are the instructions to the board, and that's in Title 33. So there's actually two separate components here. The Title 7 specifies the criminal history, how often you have to submit to criminal history checks. And then page 5 directs the board, what the board has to do. And all we're doing there is the board requests this information based on 719-106A, which is 19. Let's see, 106A. So that we're not changing that. I mean, I think we actually need it. We need it in Title 7 for the requirements for the fingerprinting and the criminal background check on page 4.
Madam Chairman,
Representative Stibar.
can we ask Greg Searles to get back on?
Sure. Mr. Searles, are you still there? Welcome back, Mr. Searles.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Did you hear Representative Hallinan's proposed amendment?
I have, Madam Chair, and my understanding is that he would like to have background checks completed every 4 years on those that are licensed with the board. Is that correct?
Well, this part that he is looking at on page 2 speaks specifically to fingerprinting. So if the amendment goes forward as he has it, the people would only be fingerprinted every 4 years, but you would ask for criminal history background information every 2 without the fingerprints. Is that possible?
Madam Chair, no. The board has to submit fingerprints to DCI to obtain that background check, as far as I'm aware. And I think Representative Stivar may be correct, where either 3338-107, which deals with renewals, if Representative Hallinan would like this to be done every 4 years as part of the renewal process, might be an appropriate place, or back where the original amendment was made on page 4, I think you could also put the language there of every other renewal, knowing that it's a 2-year renewal, so it would be 4 years or something in that. I'm not quite sure which best suits what Representative Hallinan is trying to accomplish.
Okay, stay here, Mr. Searles. Representative Hallinan, any thoughts?
I think that's probably a good resolution of this problem would be to put on there every 4 years on the on letter I on page 4, on little I, page 4, would have it be request criminal history background checks on licensure and applicants as authorized every 4 years under WS 719-106A. So it would delay that to be an every 4-year requirement. That should be enough to get the information that they need, I think.
So let's, just to keep organized, Representative Hallinan, do you want to, at the moment, withdraw your amendment for the bottom of page 2?
I don't understand. What do you want? Do you want me to withdraw it and then come forward with a new
Well,
amendment?
right. So Representative Hallinan, what we understand from Mr. Searles is that it is not possible for them to request criminal background histories without the fingerprints. So to say that they only have to be fingerprinted every 4 years, but that part would conflict with our already existing amendment. So what I would recommend is that you withdraw this particular amendment, and then on the top of page 4, you could offer another amendment, just adding the words every other in front of renewal, and that would be really short, I would think.
Okay, that's what I would do. I would withdraw that amendment then.
Is that all right with the person who seconded it, who I forget who it was?
It is, Madam Chairman. It's
Thank you, Representative Worf. Okay, hang on now. Let me go back and, good thing I was doing this in pencil. Okay, top of page 4. So Representative Hallinan, then I understand your new amendment to read in the new language, background information on initial or renewal.
Madam Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I'm sorry. Oh, is that Carla?
Yes, it is.
Oh, yes.
I know that you wanted to break for the inauguration.
Okay, you know what, guys? I think we can do this in like 2 minutes. Okay, let's. Are there any other amendments other than Representative Hallinan's? No. Okay. So we have an amendment to say the board shall request, on the top of page 4, paragraph J, the board shall request criminal history background information on initial or every other renewal. And if you will grant me the permission to make that grammatical with LSO, but that's what we want. Is that okay with you? Is that all right, Representative Hallinan?
That's
It'd be really
correct.
nice to knock off this bill before we
That's
break.
okay.
Okay, is there a second for Representative Hallinan's conceptual amendment? Okay, seconded by Romero Martinez. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of this amendment, please raise up your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, that amendment passes. All right, no further amendments being heard.
Question on the bill.
Question on the bill. Carla, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is for a due pass with amendments on House Bill 004. Representative Clifford.
Representative Clifford, aye.
Representative Conley.
Representative Connolly, aye.
Representative Flitner.
Representative Flitner, aye.
Representative Ottman.
Representative Ottman, aye.
Representative Romero Martinez.
Representative Romero Martinez, aye.
Representative Stivar.
Representative Stiver, aye.
Representative Worf.
Representative Worf votes aye.
Vice Chairman Hallinan.
Vice Chairman Hallinan votes aye.
And Chairman Wilson.
Chairman Wilson votes aye.
Madam Chairman, 9 ayes.
Okay, very good. Committee, we are going to recess until 10:40, at which time we will take up House Bill 3, Certified Addictions Practitioners. Please, you can turn off your picture and your voice, and Representative Worf, did you have a question?
Yes, Madam Chairman, do we need to have a new login or do we just stay on or? I
No,
mean, how
just-
does-
And unless Jonathan tells us otherwise, just turn off your picture and your name and just go away for a while and then come back. Any other instructions, Mr. Sandoval?
Madam Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, very good. We'll see you at 10:40. Thank you. Carla and Jonathan, are you there?
Yes, Madam Chairman.
We're about ready to relaunch. Okay. Jonathan, I think we can start streaming again.
Madam Chairman, we are streaming currently.
Oh, well, I hope we weren't all seeing whatever we happened to do while we weren't here. Very good. I guess we had a stream of we will be back at 10:40. So here we are back again. And soon as Representative Vice Chairman Hallinan gets back, I will turn the chair over to him while we do House Bill 3. I'm going to go ahead and start. I think probably I can manage calling on people for questions while I present. This is a much shorter bill, and we have a hard. Oh, here comes Representative Hallinan. Representative Hallinan, you want to take the chair momentarily while I present House Bill 3? You're on mute, though.
I will. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Representative Hallinan. Okay, so just a reminder before I start, we do have a hard stop of 12:30 to allow LSO to assist the afternoon committees. So whatever we do before then is what we do, and whatever we don't, we don't. And just as a reminder, we were planning to take testimony on House Bill 38, but not work that bill today in any case. So I'm pretty sure that we'll be fine. So, Mr. Vice Chairman, House Bill 3, Certified Addictions Practitioner Certification Amendments. Just a little bit of background for new members to the committee. In past years, we have had this material and the bill we just voted on in one bill. They both fall under the same board and many of the same issues we were trying to do. But because there were some more, it was this area of practice that fell under more discussion. And so during the interim, we thought, well, maybe the easiest way to do is just divide out the material, and that way we could at least get through the Mental Health Professions Practice Act with the fingerprinting requirements and the reciprocity requirements. And then if this one needed any additional work, we would do it separately. I have to say that I do think that we have reached the point in our discussion with providers and what we've got in the bill that frankly, I don't see this one as controversial anymore anyway. So I look forward to a pretty easy process on this, of course, welcoming whatever people have to say. So this, again, as I say, this is looking on page 1, House Bill 3. This is specific to the certified addictions practitioner. So we'll turn over to page 2, which is where the meat of this is. And you can see in the black text, most of this is existing language. So the first change starts up on line 11, where we have changed the word human resource to human behavioral. And we put the definition in that first bill. So obviously, if some strange thing happened and House Bill 4 died and this one went forward, we would have to amend the definition into this bill. But it just seemed best to put it in one place. And I explained our reasoning on that before. Human resource has come to mean, if it ever meant something different, doesn't mean what we wanted it to mean anymore. Lines 14 through 16. There had been a desire, and much of this actually happened before I came onto the committee, But there had been a desire to really reference national standards for accreditation in the field, just being more than up to the board. So that's 14 through 16, who's received a baccalaureate level equivalency. Then on line 19, we've asked the board to consult the training and experience standards of appropriate national professional associations. I'm pretty sure Mr. Craig will have some discussion about that. There are some specific groups that have addictions therapy type requirements, or the standards of an appropriate federal agency. And I have not actually heard previous discussion from 2 years on this. I would hypothesize that that has to do with either Department of Justice as far as corrections, or there may be some CMS, HHS type things for healthcare, but the standards there sometimes applied to agencies. Then page 3, I think, is where we did the most work in trying to get this bill something that really worked for everybody, because one of the challenges was with reciprocity. So the way that this is drafted, let me just back up onto page 2. So a person who is this addictions practitioner, you'll see on line 10 that the person has a bachelor's degree that on line 16 meets the standards for accreditation in the field of addiction therapy. So this would be a person who's got some sort of, let's say, psychology degree. There probably are not that many bachelor's degrees in addictions therapy, but sociology, but yet where that degree somehow meets the standards for accreditation in addictions therapy, or a baccalaureate level equivalency, which could be, I would think, associates plus another 90 credits or some sort of thing in addiction therapy. Nonetheless, because of the probable rarity, or these may not always be available, we have specifically put in the paragraph on page 3. So a person who has received a baccalaureate degree in one of these disciplines, so let's say sociology, psychology, counseling, other than a degree in addiction therapy, may be granted certification after providing to the board satisfactory proof of 2,000 hours, which is roughly 1 year, of supervised work as a CAPA, Certified Addictions Practitioner Assistant, or equivalent in the field of addiction therapy. So here's where we're trying to bring in people who have, let's say, a sociology degree, but they have been able to work for a year at the lower level, which has parameters set by national groups. And that this is last year, those of you who are here will, and the previous year, you will remember that there have been attempts to get credit for time working in the field. And so this is what we have attempted to do, to bring that in so that people who have worked in the field of addictions therapy without a bachelor's degree specifically in that, but some other bachelor's degree, can be brought in for this certification and have their work experience count. And then remember that in the bill we just passed, the Mental Health Professions Practice Act, we expanded the flexibility for reciprocity significantly. So that expansion of reciprocity will impact these people too. It's just not in this bill. As I say, we split out the more challenging parts to work so that we could at least get that other part through. But I think that we have made a lot of headway. I'm sure that there are still some issues going forward, but I think it's vastly improved. And I do believe we've reached a point where we can happily go forward. But that's, Mr. Vice Chairman, that's all that there really is about this bill. And I would be glad to answer questions. And Mr. Vice Chairman, you're muted.
Representative Stivar has a question.
I'll tell you now, I'm a no vote on this. You look at the National Certification Addiction Counselor Level 2 requirement bachelor's degree credentials. This is coming from their certifications. It says bachelor's degree in a higher substance abuse disorder, addiction, and are related counseling subjects: social work, mental health counseling, marriage and family, psychology. They're requiring 3 years and 6,000 hours to do this. And again, I said it last year on the floor. I'm going to say it again. We should not be, no, I won't say that. I'll wait. There's a standard already out there. We shouldn't be going through and making it easier for somebody and non-qualified people to do this. They've got a standard out there. Why are we still playing with this and lowering the standards? I was a no vote every time on this, and I'm a no vote again.
So, Mr. Vice Chairman, I gather that the question is, why are we lowering the standards? So the answer to that, Mr. Vice Chairman, would be that we are requiring a bachelor's degree, which we are certainly requiring for various other things. And we are requiring a year's worth of work experience. Granted, that is less than we require in other, or than is required in other states. But as we discussed in our last bill, we're really short of providers in this state. And so it has been, it was felt, and admittedly, this is a compromised position, but in order to go forward and enable more providers in a field of specifically of substance abuse, which we have in our criminal justice reform have identified as a major component of the challenges that people have in staying out of the justice system, that this is a way of finding people with the coursework in fields and with a year's worth of work experience, keeping in mind that these people will still have, this is a certification, so they will still be supervised by people with master's or PhD level work, that we felt that this was an acceptable way to get more people in who are still have experience in the field. Mr. Vice Chair, I think there was someone else with a question.
Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. And actually, I'm going to follow along with Representative Stivar's kind of line of questioning. When I look at the kind of the list of bachelor's degrees that are possible, that an individual could earn, many of them are not clinical training with supervision in the middle. So I'm turning to then the supervised work experience that you include on page 3, line 7. And I'm curious about the kind of specificity of that supervised work experience. I'm familiar with examples where someone would literally be shadowing, and I'm a little bit more okay with that, right? The kind of shadowing that honestly an individual would get if they were in a baccalaureate degree where they were doing some clinical training. But I think in many instances, supervised work experience means that once a month, an individual meets with someone who has the credential and their caseload is reviewed. That would concern me. So I'm curious if you could give us a little bit more explanation about that supervised work experience.
Madam Chairman.
Mr. Vice Chairman, thank you. I'm looking in the statute book here to find, and I thought I had put a post-it on it. Failing, let's see, okay. So we have there on line 8, 2,000 hours of supervised work experience as a certified addictions practitioner, assistant, or equivalent in the field of addiction therapy. So I'm just going to read out of the statute book because I've had to mark up my statute book significantly to understand this whole area of the mental health board. So I'm going to look aside for a moment, or at least I will try to extract out from the CAPA what our statute says. So under the supervision of a qualified clinical supervisor, let's see, applicant has completed 270 contact hours of training in alcoholism and drug abuse or related counseling subjects that meet the academic and training content standards established by the board. Demonstrated knowledge in the field of addictions treatment by passing a standard exam as the board prescribes. That's what we have in statute now. So one of the changes that we made over the course from the last few years is additionally, it just said work experience. Well, that's very wide open. I mean, they could change tires at Big O, that's work experience. But so that's why we inserted specifically as a CAPA or equivalent in the field of addiction therapy. And I don't know, Mr. Searles may want to specify, state what they might do in rule. We can probably hear from Mr. Craig as to far as what kind of work is typically done in that area. Again, as I say, this has been a 3-year discussion, and that's why we have this as a separate bill, because just the finding the line between the perfect and the need has been a challenge. And so I'm certainly open to continuing that discussion, but this is what we landed on.
Any other questions of the chairman? I don't see any. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Good job. So then, committee, we will go ahead and take public testimony. Will those who are in the attendee box please put up your blue hand if you wish to testify on this bill? I'm pretty sure I can hypothesize a few of them. Do we have any state agency people? The state agency people who are on, Mr. Johansson, Mr. Searles, Mr. Shannon. I don't see their hands up yet, though. I hope they've come back. They're not off just listening to the talking heads on the TV. Because frankly, I find it hard to believe that none of those people want to testify on this bill. Well, if you're not a state agency person and you would like to testify on this bill, please put up your blue hand. I see, strangely, hang on. I think maybe I just don't have my, there we go. Okay, now we got it. Frank Craig, Kelly Heenan, and Shelley Foland. Awesome. I'm just going to start at the, let's see. Kelly Heenan, I believe, is Kelly, are you with, Jonathan, is Kelly with the board?
Madam Chairman, I believe that's what Mr. Searles said.
Okay, then let's have Kelly Heenan in first as a state agency. Good morning, Kelly.
Good
Welcome.
morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Kelly Heenan. I'm the chairwoman for the Mental Health Licensing Board. I just wanted to quickly say that we are in support of the current bill. I do think we have gone rounds and rounds for 3 years to kind of get to the point that we're at. A lot of the difficulty, I think, in getting here has been, Representative Wilson mentioned, national standards, and with the addictions field, national standards are not governed by simply one body. There are a couple of different bodies that set standards with addictions, and I think it has created a lot of different type of experience level and requirements across other states. And so I think this has become sort of our best alternative to reach kind of a middle ground between states that may have a much lower standard and states that may have a much higher. And so I think this is sort of like that middle of the road that we have all come to say, we can go here, we can agree on this. And so as far as the Mental Health Licensing Board goes, we do support this bill.
Questions for Ms. Heenan? Ms. Heenan, I do have one. Do you have any thoughts from the point of view of the board as to what kind of, whether there would be any more specificity in rule as to this supervised work experience? Thinking of Representative Connolly's question about the depth of the person's involvement in the work. Do you feel that the CAPA requirements lay that out, or would there be more expansion in rule?
Thank you, Chairman Wilson and Representative Connolly. Yes, I do believe that the current rules and scope of practice outline adequately what they would do. Had we not amended this bill to say supervised practice of 2,000 hours, there was a lot more confusion when it just said work experience. But with that added amendment, I do think Chapter 3 on the CAPA definitely expands what they can and cannot do and how that supervised experience would look. So I don't foresee at this point in time, any significant changes.
Further question for Ms. Heenan. Representative Flitner.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Ms. Heenan, I was just wondering what the turnover rate is in these positions. If you could answer that, please.
Ms. Heenan.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson. Did you say the turnover rate?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chairman.
I think it is higher in certain discipline, like in certain fields. Like if you work in an agency setting for substance abuse, I don't believe they have the same turnover rate that perhaps like our corrections facilities have had with these types of, just because of the work environment and also the location that several of them are in. But I think to be fair, because this is a lower level certificate, I don't believe that there's always turnover in terms of people quitting, but definitely moving up in licensure status and going from a CAPA to a CAP to then an LAT, because as they gain experience in education, they typically turn those certificates over to a more advanced level of practice. So to remain at that lower certification level probably creates maybe the likelihood that we have a slightly higher turnover rate than I think is probably more advancement in the field.
Thank you.
More questions for Ms. Heenan? Great, thank you. We maybe call on you again. This seems to happen.
I will be around. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Next up, I see Mr. Craig is up next.
Madam
Actually,
Chairman,
let me just.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes, I see Director Shannon is here. Let's go to Director Shannon first. Thank you. Welcome back, Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Once again, I'm Dan Shannon, Director of the Department of Corrections. I just had a few comments concerning this bill. The department is neither for nor against, but I do have a few statements. There's no doubt over the past 8 to 10 years, we really struggled with trying to have these positions filled within our institutions. We are supportive of supervised work, such as peer specialists, things of that nature in the environment. But and on the other end of the spectrum, though, we also would not have any less of a qualification, at least for my chair, inside those institutions as we would within the community. And I would stand for questions, Madam Chair.
Questions for Director. Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Shannon, what do you mean by peer supervision? And again, I'm going back to my kind of initial question about supervised work. If you had people with the certified addictions practitioner assistant credential, do you have people who are in the institution who could do that supervision?
Madam Chair, Representative Connolly, yes, we do, Representative Connolly. And your question of what do I mean by that supervision, it's been very effective in institutional settings. When I spoke of peer specialists from inmate work to subordinates within the mental health as well as substance abuse, that it has been effective temporary license. We've had good success with that inside institutions.
But Director Shannon, just to be clear, because these are this kind of a challenging area of licensure. So a peer specialist or a person who might be an inmate but has successfully worked through their addictions experience and is assisting in some sort of group setting or something, that does not make a person a certified addictions practitioner assistant. So, right? I mean, that's really a separate issue. Am I correct on that?
Madam Chair, you're absolutely correct with that. I was just using that for an example, and I didn't mean to apply that towards this subject.
No, but just so that in the and again, we've got a lot of new members on the committee. So the background is, so if a person were working for the Department of Corrections as a certified addictions practitioner assistant, the question from Representative Connolly was, do you have supervisors at the appropriate level that would enable that CAPA to move up to a CAP? Representative Connolly, am I phrasing your question correctly? So in other words, does this career ladder work in your agency as well as elsewhere?
I believe it does. Madam Chair, Representative Conley, I believe it does. And I believe the hours of supervision, if I'm correct, it's 2,000 hours. And in the past, we have had, because of shortages, we've been granted temporary licenses, and we've been very successful that we had the supervisors available and present.
Okay, I think Representative Connolly.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And so I'll just try to bring it home to make sure, because I am concerned that I don't want us to credential through this bill individuals who honestly don't have the background in terms of their educational training to be in an institution like Rollins, where it's incredibly important in my mind that the work that they do is done very well, that they don't have the supervision that they need. And so in order for them to have the supervision that they need, do you have those in the prison right now? And again, I'm going back to my concern that I understand that some supervised work experience means having someone with a credential check over their paperwork and their caseload once a month. That doesn't meet the criteria in my mind for adequate supervised work experience.
Madam Chair, Representative Conley, we more than exceed the minimum standards as far as supervision within our facilities, such as WSP or located in Rollins. But I too have the same concern. I'm not here to provide input on the qualifications. I don't think that would be the Department of Corrections' place. But I would refer back to my original statement that I would recommend no less qualifications than we would have in the community inside of Rollins institutions.
There was discussion in past years, Representative Connolly, about setting up a separate licensing procedure so that people working in the correction system would be separately licensed and would not actually have the licensing that they would need to practice in the community. And those bills have not succeeded over the years. And so this bill is kind of an attempt, and I frankly, I felt strongly that that was unacceptable, because just from the human workforce standpoint, I mean, aside from the benefit to the client, but to have a person who can only work in the prison, and if they want to take a job outside of the prison, they're not licensed, it seems really silly. So we're not going with that. That just didn't fly. So this is maybe Director Shannon, could you give us a sense? So if you have a person, and I know Mr. Craig has got his hand up next, but from your perspective as the director, if we have a person who is either a CAPA or a CAP, and both of those people need, I assume a licensed person supervising them, how many hours a week, let's say, do you have a licensed addiction therapist or a person with a licensure, a master's, PhD level, interacting with the bachelor's level people in the prison system? What kind of ratio have we got in terms of time and workforce?
Madam Chair, I could not accurately answer that question. The way the facilities are designed, where the oversight, where the person who wants to stay on a temporary license, they would not be permitted to interact with a group without that presence. So we're looking between 24 and 32 hours a week, if that answers your question.
I think that Representative Connolly, does that seem okay? Okay, more questions for Director Shannon? Okay, great. Thank you very much. I see Mr. Craig is up next. Mr. Craig, welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, my name is Frank Craig, representing in part for the Wyoming Association of Addiction Professionals, although I do provide direction on the institutional programs that we contract to the Department of Corrections. In listening to your recent discussion, I would like to note that under contract that we are required to follow the board's specifications for clinical supervision, which specifically means that for every 20 hours of clinical services that a CAPA or a CAP would provide, there has to be a face-to-face review or interaction from somebody that is qualified under the board to be a clinical supervisor. So yes, those are being followed. And my job as the state director in another capacity of supervision on an administrative side, it's not really clinically focused, although I'm ensuring that our clinical supervisors and those who are being supervised are provided what's required at the board level. So you rest assured that those things are definitely happening. I would like to point out in my experience, and again, from working from another state, my license is an independent license in the state of Texas that did not require the way Wyoming structures a license independently with a master's level. I have a degree, bachelor level in sociology, and the components that allowed me to be qualified to do substance use disorder treatment fell more in the extenuating training and educational hours on top of my bachelor's degree, plus subscribed amount of supervised work experience before I was able to take the licensing test in Texas, which comes from an IC and RC examination. It's an international examination and accepted. To say that, I would point out that in Wyoming, there are 3 different levels for practicing substance use disorder treatment. The first level is the CAPA, Certified Addictions Practitioner Assistant. And that currently doesn't require a degree, although we prefer that degree would be at the associate level. And hopefully we can work, maybe in the interim session to try to get that built. The equivalency at the national level for NAADAC, the National Association of Addiction Professionals, they have an NCAC level 1, which would mimic similar to our CAPA in the state of Wyoming. The NCAC level 1 does not require any kind of a degree, but it does require a minimum of 270 hours specified coursework in addiction specifically, and has to work under clinical supervision to be able to obtain the scope of practice. The next level Wyoming has is the CAP, which is what we're talking about in this bill today. At the national level, that would equate to the NCAC level 2 credential. And as Representative Stivar pointed out, there is a work experience component in addition to the education and training that's specific to addiction. The NCAC level 2 does require a bachelor's degree, and it's set for 6,000 hours of supervised work experience. And then you move into the master's level, which are both very similar. The LAT, Licensed Addiction Therapist, is what Wyoming sets, and the equivalency at the national level is the MAC, Master's Addictions Counselor. There is currently in Wyoming, there is no requirement for supervised work experience at all, which I think is a very necessary part once you've obtained the education at whatever level you're at, to be able to show and practice competency before you set for the examination for licensing or certification. And we just don't have that at all in Wyoming. That's really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, and you're putting all of your education and training to practice under supervision. The supervision in and of itself at the national level and what most states require is a minimum bachelor's degree to be able to provide clinical supervision. In Wyoming, we have that standard at the licensed or master's level. In essence, in my 20-something years of practicing, I actually, at the bachelor's level, was providing clinical supervision to interns who were achieving the next level in the career ladder. And again, that's another thing I'm hoping we can maybe work at in an interim session to mimic the specific addictions scope of practice where those things lie, and would likely be very different than what you would see with an LPC or an LMFT, of course, those individuals would need to be at the master's level, but the specificity for substance use disorder treatment at the national level doesn't require those kinds of degrees as we do in Wyoming. Additionally, on the NCAC level 2, the educational requirements are 450 hours on top of the bachelor's degree. They don't require those to be college level courses, but in Wyoming, the college level courses that the board accepts only require, I believe, 380 educational hours. So we're not watering down or trying to water down any kinds of standards. In fact, the missing work experience component actually adds to the requirement for somebody who has, at a minimum, the associate's degree specific to addictions. And then moving forward, we're building that career ladder then so that somebody who maybe goes to Casper College and gets the certification through Casper College and is able to obtain their CAPA would be able to then work towards getting their bachelor's degree and the next step in the ladder being the CAP. I hope I've explained that enough. It has been a daunting task over the last several years, and we're so glad that we're able to come to an agreement on this bill. And I would certainly be in favor of moving that forward. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
I'll take questions for Mr. Craig. I will point out to the Dear Committee that Mr. Craig has served us up a big helping of acronym soup, which will perhaps just help you understand some of the challenges over the last several years of trying to pull things together. And before I take questions, I just want to ask one thing. So Mr. Craig, the other thing that we've started trying to look at from this committee, and we haven't really gotten very far yet, to my understanding, we have very limited coursework above the associate's level in Wyoming for people who are wanting to work their way up. Am I correct in that?
Madam Chair, that's correct. And the way that the board reviews that is through transcripts. And sometimes in my experience, I've seen where certain courses are accepted from certain colleges. Of course, they have to be accredited colleges, but it can be very daunting for somebody who has achieved the bachelor's level and even achieved additional college courses and still aren't able to qualify for the CAP in Wyoming. I don't know if you'll recall from the testimony a couple of months ago in the interim session, we had a young lady that actually spoke to that, who had achieved a bachelor's degree in psychology, went on to Casper College and completed coursework specifically for addictions, and was still denied her CAP because the transcripts didn't meet the board's definition of whatever the course was, although those courses at the national level would have been accepted without question. Interestingly, NADAC also is setting up a minority fellowship scholarship that we would actually be able to access in Wyoming at the bachelor's level to help people get the education at the formal level. And this is just another step in that direction.
Okay, so we let him sprinkle a little more parsley on that acronym soup. Questions for Mr. Craig? Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Craig, what do you think of the 6,000 hours that's required in other states and the 2,000 hours that is required in this bill here? Do you think it's necessary that it would be 6,000 hours, or do you think the 2,000 hours is sufficient?
Mr. Craig.
Madam Chair, Representative Hanlon, states have the authority to set work experience, and there are several states, and again, like Wyoming has no requirement for work experience, but some states have 1,000 hours, some states have 4,000 hours, some states have 10,000 hours, and they typically are related to the formal education as to how any state would set the number of hours to be supervised in that work experience. Since we're looking at in this bill a requirement that you're already certified as a CAPA to be able to move forward once you've obtained your degree, then you could apply those 2,000 hours of work experience. I think it is quite sufficient. The national level for the same equivalency, where it says 6,000 hours, understandably would be obtainable, but only after you have achieved certification or license from a licensing authority. You can't just apply at NADAC for their credential until you've already been licensed or certified in any state.
More questions for Mr. Craig? I don't see any. Okay, Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So if a bachelor level person has to be supervised 1 hour for every 20 hours of direct client contact, somebody with associate's degree, are they going to follow under that same standard, or are they going to have more supervision?
Mr. Craig.
Madam Chair, Representative Stivar, the supervision requirements would be set at the same, but keep in mind that the scope of practice for the associates level limits their ability to perform certain tasks, such as therapy sessions, and being able to complete things like an assessment. Those would have to be done by somebody with a minimum of a CAP. But to answer your question, the supervision requirements would certainly be the same as set forth by the board.
So just to clarify, so a CAP and a CAPA might receive the same hours of supervision a week, but the work that those people are doing is different. So, I mean, let's just to pick something differently, if I'm supervising my 4-year-old granddaughter, I'm not being dismissive of the CAPA, I'm just picking something that I've been doing the last few weeks. If I'm supervising my 4-year-old granddaughter in the kitchen, I might let her cut out cookies and I'm watching from 4 feet away. Whereas if I'm supervising my husband in the kitchen, all I have to do when he calls out, "Where is the can of diced tomato?" and I tell him it's in the pantry. I mean, my 1.5 minutes of conversation might be the same number of minutes, but the level of what I'm supervising is different. I hope that wasn't disrespectful to all the people doing that hard work, which is obviously way harder than that. But does that make some sense?
Madam Chair, yes. The criteria for clinical supervision typically is accepted from through the Department of Health through SAMHSA, which is the specific substance use disorder category. They fall out of something that we call TAP 21, which is a technical assistance manual that outlines very specific things for the specificity of substance use disorder treatment. There's not really a requirement for hours or things that somebody has to be supervised. Again, each state sets those accordingly to what they think would be necessary. Conceivably, it could be something done in rule if we thought that a CAPA needed to have some additional supervision or hands-on in the kitchen, if you would.
Okay, more questions for Mr. Searles. Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Craig, are there bachelor programs in the state specific just to addiction?
Mr. Craig.
Madam Chair, Representative Clifford, at this time there is not. In the state of Wyoming, somebody would have to go to an online accredited college or seek, the bachelor's level elsewhere.
Thank you. And Representative Clifford, that's a very good question. One of the things that we tried to get started with maybe 2 interims ago, and sort of the whole COVID thing has sort of conquered our to-do list, but looking at what opportunities we have in state for gaining education in areas where we really need people, that's on my heart. So we will hopefully keep following up on some of those questions. Representative Worf.
Yes, Madam Chairman, Chairwoman, I guess I have the same question. I'm not sure exactly how long this has been discussed. I know I followed it last year, but I'm under the same impression that this is another situation where we are in dire needs of this service. That's one of the primary reasons why we're kind of affording this or looking at this legislation. So how long has this actually been in consideration, I guess is my question.
I guess that's a question for Mr. Craig. To my knowledge, 3 years, but maybe Mr. Craig has been suffering under it for longer.
Madam Chair, when I first came to Wyoming in 2015, when we were awarded the contract with Department of Corrections, is when I was tasked with putting together the appropriate qualified treatment staff. That is when I started seeing the differences in my experience between things that were required in Texas and then things that were set forth in statute and in rule. And I believe it was probably 2016 or 2017 when I started some advocacy at the legislative level. So, you know, roughly that time frame.
Okay. More questions for Mr. Craig? I do see Ms. Foland has got her hand up, so thank you, Mr. Craig. I'm sure you will hang around, but I think we'll bring in Ms. Foland. And while bringing in Ms. Foland, committee, I'm sure you are gathering the wrestling that has gone on over 3 years between the desire and need to provide practitioners, and yet the desire also to not lower the bar such that the services provided would not be adequate. And obviously we're somewhat continuing with that wrestle. And I do think that we have found at least a place that we can move forward that helps the position, helps where we're at some. We have perhaps not reached perfection, but I think you will all detect that well, this is one of those famous quotes about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Ms. Foland, welcome. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Cheryl Foland, and I'm a master's level social worker, a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Rollins. And I'm also the legislative advocate for the Wyoming Association of Addictions Professionals. And to add more acronyms to the soup, I am also a member of the National Association of Social Workers and the Wyoming Counseling Association member. So I cover all my bases where mental health and substance abuse is concerned, since I treat all of those individuals. As to some of the questions that I've been listening to from Representative Connolly, Representative Stivar, and of course his in-depth knowledge, along with Representative Clifford and Flitner. I wanted to give you some statistics to kind of help frame some of the questions that we have. And this is information that was provided to me by the board, by Mr. Searles. And as of December the 1st, so I don't have any recent, but as of December the 1st, we have 1,706 credentialed individuals in Wyoming, actually practicing in Wyoming. There were a total of 2,214 active credentialed providers. 508 are licensed or credentialed in Wyoming, but practice outside of Wyoming. Of the 1,706 credentialed and licensed individuals, 45 people had the certified addiction professional credential. 15 had the CAPA, the certified addiction professional assistant. we had 101 licensed addiction therapists. Of those 101 licensed addictions therapists, 85 had more than one credential. So that means that they were or are a licensed clinical social worker plus a licensed addictions therapist, or an LPC, licensed professional counselor, plus the LAT. So at this point, those numbers are terrifying to me as a provider. We don't have enough resources for the number of people that we need. And as Ms. Semino had stated earlier this morning, COVID has provided us with a very unique opportunity and challenge that most of us in private practice have waiting lists. We don't have those resources. We desperately need bodies to come to Wyoming, or as Mr. Craig had discussed, those starting points as a CAPA, and allowing them the opportunity to gain more education and to gain that supervised practice. And I 100% agree with Representative Stivar that we need to look at the totality of what we're trying to do here. I don't believe we're looking at watering down anything. I do agree with Mr. Craig that by adding the work experience, specific work experience, we are elevating the standards. At this point in time, our mental health crisis is that in Wyoming. And I, as a personal professional in the state, hope and obviously support this bill as a stepping stone. It's not the end all save all, but I think it's certainly a movement forward to help us get where we need to be. And certainly by incorporating the national standards from not only NADAC, again, the acronym soup, but also from the federal agencies, and you're absolutely correct, Chairwoman Wilson, they come from CMS, HHS, Health and Human Services, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They also come from the National Institutes of Health, which govern a lot of what we do because it is research-based. And then the standards are also approved through SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Agency at the federal level. And when you combine all of that, we have, as private practice or any practitioners, we have a lot that we are required to support, not only from a licensure perspective, but also an ethical responsibility that we take very seriously. So with that, I stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Foland? So just, Ms. Foland, just to pin it down for folks who are kind of, we've been even those of us who have been involved for a while have been probably thinking about other things for a little bit. So just to clarify this particular bill, the certified addictions practitioner is in existence now in Wyoming. The CAPA is in existence in Wyoming. It seems to me that the two major impacts of this bill are to put in some of this national standards language, and also that paragraph on page 3 that attempts to bring in people with other kinds of human behavioral degrees who have had some addictions training and the 2,000 hours of work experience to bring those folks into the workforce. Am I summarizing correctly?
Madam Chair, you are absolutely correct.
Okay, questions again from Ms. Foland? Okay, thank you. And we have Andy Somerville with her hand up too. This little blue hand thing is kind of handy over there. I could grow to like this Zoom feature. Thank you, Ms. Foland. I'm sure you won't go away too far. And here comes Ms. Somerville. Welcome back, Ms. Somerville.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andy Somerville representing WAMSAC, and I just have a couple of brief comments on this. So just to put this in perspective for the newer committee members, our community mental health centers employ a number of these CAPs. We provide probably the bulk of outpatient substance abuse treatment and residential treatment in the state. In fiscal year 19, our centers provided over 160,000 hours of service for outpatient treatment and almost 70,000 days of residential service treatment for substance abuse disorders. So as you can tell, this particular professional credential is important to us. I wanted to just kind of clarify a couple of things in terms of the conversation you guys had about supervisors. This bill, because of the supervisory structure that we have in Wyoming, this bill will increase, the burden of supervisors to make sure that they're supervising appropriately. That is a conversation that we've had. When you're bringing in somebody without those 450 hours of education or 380 hours, you need to make sure that they are working within their scope and doing it appropriately. So that's a conversation that we're having in terms of making sure that our clinical supervisors are, properly trained and performing those duties well. And the other point I wanted to hit on was in terms of healthcare, mental health professional shortage. The entire state of Wyoming has been designated by the federal government as a HPSA, which is a health professional shortage area specific to all of these mental health professions. It's master's level, it's bachelor's level, it's the whole gambit. And although licensing can be a component, we don't necessarily see the current licensing system as troubling or creating an undue burden on those professional areas. I think there are, as we've had, Madam Chairwoman, conversations over the last two interims about how that's a factor in that. We do think it can be a factor, but we also want to remind the committee that there are other factors that contribute to the healthcare shortage, and that certainly it's wages, it's our rural nature, it's our inability to keep our young people that graduate from college sometimes here in the state. And again, just to remind to let the new members of the committee know, Madam Chairman is absolutely correct in that when we started two interims ago, started talking about education availability in Wyoming, that is still on WAMSAC's radar. We've continued to have conversations with the professional counseling program, as well as the social worker program at the University of Wyoming. And there are conversations that are moving there in terms of increasing that education. Also pulling out and making it more apparent that they're receiving addictions education within these classes. We found sometimes they're not titled well, or you can't exactly show, but you actually did have 4 weeks of that class as addictions training. So all of those conversations are moving forward. And so I just wanted to let the committee know that hasn't fallen off our radar, and it's tangentially kind of related to this bill, but there's a bigger picture here beyond what we're fixing or what this legislation would change. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Somerville? I see none. Okay, thank you very much. I see Lindsay Simino has just raised her hand.
Okay, start video.
Yep. Lindsay, welcome back. Now, let me just say, committee, those of you who have been in the legislature but on other committees, you know by now that every committee has its cast of usual visitors, whatever committee you're on. And you are definitely seeing the mental health cast of visitors. We have several other collections of visitors in acute care or family services or that workforce service type things, but you're definitely getting to know some of our folks quite well. Ms. Simino, welcome back.
Indeed, we are frequent flyers. Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, Lindsay Simino, Wyoming Counseling Association. We are excited about this bill and the fact that they have been split. Just to reemphasize some points, this is, as the Chairwoman emphasized, it is a major compromise. As been previously said, this is a major compromise and not a perfect compromise with some national standards. And it would be a lie if we didn't say that that definitely brings some concerns as far as, does this protect the public? And I think those are fair discussions to be had. And also the burden as far as the supervision piece, as my colleague Andy also brought up. I think that's also a fair piece to be looking forward. When we look forward into the future, I think that's a fair piece to also consider. It's also fair to consider how burdensome it is to open a practice act. Whenever we open a practice act for any profession within the state, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical therapy, speech therapy, it's really a great invitation to for anybody to try to sneak really interesting things in. And as we have noticed across all behavioral health professions, we are noticing that it is becoming less and less likely for behavioral health professionals at the bachelor's level to be independent, as Mr. Craig talked about earlier. And so we're seeing those master's levels more supervised more and more and more. And so if there's any reason that this bill doesn't quite fit, there is a greater chance that we will have to come back and open up this practice act and possibly fix it later. We do not want to do that. We would like to never have to do a practice act bill again. I think I speak for me and all of my colleagues when I say that we would like to never do a practice act bill for the next 5 years. And so if we can figure this out, that would be great. But yes, there are reasonable concerns, and wanted to emphasize that as we close out today. And so I stand for questioning.
Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, Ms. Simoneau, now that you and Ms. Somerville have spoken, I realized that my concern was about the supervised work experience of those with only a bachelor's degree. You seem to have taken care of that one. I feel a little bit better about that one. But now you've both raised the concern that if we increase the number of these individuals who need 2,000 hours of supervised work experience, that we might not have the supervisors in the state who are able to do that. Could you just talk a little bit more about that? I don't want to, it seems like it's possible we could kind of flood the system now with individuals who are in need of supervision, but we don't have the supervisors. And therefore, again, I'm concerned about a very vulnerable population and the kind of services they will be getting.
Absolutely. I would also, Madam Chairwoman, forgive me for being out of practice, Representative Connolly, I would defer to my colleague Andy to that. Though I do represent many providers within the association, I am more familiar with the group practices and those who are the private providers, whereas Andy, she has a better situation on those community mental health workers and the clinical supervisors within the community mental health workers. But more than likely, that is a once a week to every other week situation. And so if we are increasing that, will we have those clinical supervisors available and able to meet that need? And how do we create that network? That it's a reasonable question to be asking is what I can emphasize with you today.
But at the same time, Ms. Simoneau, if we were to say we won't bring in any more low-level providers to help clients because it's too hard to supervise, are we just saying, well, it's better for the clients to go unserved? I mean, that you know, there's it's sort of a circular thing there.
It is.
I mean, I would hesitate to say that we will just give you nothing, or you know, that's not a very good answer either. You know,
it's not a very good answer. No, Madam Chairwoman. And so on my feet right now, I do not know what the best answer is. I do believe that we could possibly create some type of in-networking to increase that supervision process for sure, to be able to make sure that that happens and increase the ability to make sure that those supervisors are not overly burdened. Because you are correct.
Can the supervision be done by televisit? Do they have to be there in person?
No, no, they do not have to be there in person. And to my understanding, and I might need somebody from the licensing board, I do not believe it has to be one-on-one either. That it can be what we call a triad supervision. And so you can have more than one in the room.
Okay. I think we might need to call back Ms. Somerville just to flesh out the question about the supervision. Andy, are you still there? I'm sure you've not left. Nobody gets away.
Nobody.
Now you understand why we're infamous for having 8 o'clock in the evening meetings. Those of you who are new, you'll be so glad that we have to meet in the morning and get rid of our people very quickly. Ms. Somerville, welcome back. Can you, Representative Colony, can you just re-ask your question for Ms. Somerville?
Sure, Madam Chair. So Ms. Somerville, I was concerned now that the workload on those who are at that, for example, master's level in terms of doing the supervision of these now kind of bachelor's level folks who are in need of somewhat intensive supervision as they accumulate their 2,000 hours, that do we have the supervisors in the state to do this additional work if we're thinking about getting all sorts of new people in and able to do this kind of lower level work and need that 2,000 hours of supervision?
Ms. Somerville.
Madam Chairman, Representative Conley, that's an excellent question. So I'll start off by answering that supervision. Right now, our community mental health centers they have to have the required supervisors. It is sometimes difficult to get supervisors due to pay and a lot of other things. However, community mental health centers end up being the training ground for a lot of our provisional therapists. Many of them come to work for us during their 3 years in that master's provisional level before they can go out for independent practice. So it's something that's built into the community mental health center. As far as the workload, a number of my centers have expressed that although this bill would kind of change the floor a little bit in terms of getting into a cap, there are a number of my centers that probably won't hire based on that. They'll want more of that education credential to that. And so that'll be an independent center to center decision, but will certainly be a workforce decision. If they do decide to hire, and as they're reviewing their clinical supervision practices, decide that they need more supervisors to hire these types of caps that come in under this new form, I mean, that will be a discussion for each individual center, but it could be concerning, but not necessarily in all cases, if that makes sense.
Representative Connolly.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So follow up, Andy, we heard from Director Shan and DOC that a great need in, for example, the state pen. And so I'm just trying to get my head around how this could work. So would it be possible that the state pen could hire individuals who need this supervision, but the supervision isn't available in the Rawlins community? So I'm getting a little concerned about that possibility.
Ms. Somerville.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Conley, along those lines, we've had some of those discussions over the last 2 years in terms of how we can use the resources that we have to better cover the state. I would defer to Director Shannon, but with DOC specifically, it's a little complicated because they have an independent contractor or a contract that comes in to provide those services. I don't know that there's anything that would preclude us or DOC or that contractor particularly from hiring maybe somebody from Casper or Cheyenne to provide those supervision hours. But that would be probably a little bit of a complex discussion with DOC.
Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The CAPAs now, how many hours do they have to have of supervised training in order to become a CAP? And so that's my question then. How many do they have to have now?
Ms. Somerville.
Madam Chairman, Representative Hallinan, unfortunately, I would defer off the cuff to Mr. Searles on the exact number, but I do believe, if memory serves me corrected, and I stand to be corrected by Mr. Searles, that to become a CAP, you can do that through education only. So I would ask for clarification from him, maybe just to make sure I'm speaking correctly.
And we could have that clarified, but so I have the statute book open, 3338-106, and currently to be a cap, we require a baccalaureate degree, and we seem to have no work experience required now at all. But if the board, oh, I see Ms. Heenan has got her blue hand up. Ms. Heenan. It's always good to get the actual experts to pontificate, tell us the answers instead of having the chairman make them up out of her own head and statute book reading. Ms. Heenan.
Thank you, Chairwoman Wilson and committee. I would also just like to say quickly, I really appreciate the discussion and the questions you guys are asking. This is really great. In terms of the cap, you can apply to be a cap without having been a CAPA. So you're correct. There is no current rule in which it states if you have so many hours of experience as a CAPA, you would then move into being a cap. This is part of what this bill would help accomplish, is that when you have a degree and so a certain amount of work experience, you could move up. It doesn't mean they have to have a CAPA still. They could still just have the bachelor's degree. But if they had the CAPA and continued with education and experience, it would also allow them to move up. But there isn't just an experiential component. And I did want to address Representative Connolly. You have asked quite a bit about like supervision, and just as a procedural matter, I don't know if this makes a difference. Before a CAPA or a CAP can really practice, they have to file a supervision agreement with the board. So they would have supervision in place before they're allowed to practice. So there wouldn't be an issue where we had a lot of people practicing without proper supervision, because in order to conduct that role or be in that position, they have to have the approved supervisor in place before that can begin. And then the hours provided in some of those statements are also submitted to the board upon completion of supervision occasionally. So there is some oversight that way, but should there be a need for more supervisors, the agencies would have to address that, but nobody would be practicing without proper supervision.
Very good. Any questions for Ms. Keenan? You see how often just, and this has happened a lot in the Labor Committee, folks that are new. You know, some committees and some topics that you hear from, it's pretty easy to methodically go through this person, that person, the other person. Now we're going to raise this by 12% or something. But often the topics that we have on the Labor Committee, we sort of swirl around and they're kind of conceptual sometimes. This seems to be a pretty normal Labor Committee meeting to me. And so that's why we often have the witnesses get up and down more than one time if you'll visualize a room, just because I believe it is far better to go forward with the bill having had all the questions properly answered than to launch forward thinking we understood it and then find out on second reading that we actually made a big blunder. I'd rather hear from the right people to start with. Okay, so we have up on the screen a whole collection. Ms. Somerville, Ms. Simoneau, Ms. Heenan. Any questions for anybody before we let them go? Representative Ottman. You're muted still.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So just to get it all straight in my mind, to be a CAPA as an assistant, then to be a CAP, you can be hired on as a CAP without any work experience. Say you have a bachelor's degree. So without work experience, then you can come in and supervise CAPAs. Am I reading that right or hearing that right? Thank you.
And some of this is me practicing. Maybe we'll let Ms. Heenan know, but I believe the supervisors have to have a master's or PhD level. I don't believe a CAP, which is a bachelor's degree, is allowed to supervise. But I'm seeing a lot of shaking. Let's get confirmation verbally from our people. Ms. Heenan, do you want to plunge in there?
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman Wilson and Representative Ottman. You are correct. Supervisor for a CAPA, a CAP, or a provisionally licensed professional must have a master's degree or a PhD, along with so many years of experience in the field. So those providing supervision to that certificate level would always have a master's degree.
You're muted again, Representative Otten.
And supervision in that field, right?
We didn't hear the beginning of your sentence.
So they would have a master's or PhD and work experience in that specific field.
Ms. Heenan.
Yes, Chairman Wilson and Representative Ottman. It does not always necessarily mean that they have personal experience working in that field, but they could have prior education or other training that would also allow them to work in that field. Typically with supervision, we like it to be held within the same discipline, but there are times when providers such as myself, that's a marriage and family therapist, may supervise a social worker if I have the proper training and experience to do so in my other education or components. But I don't necessarily have had to have worked as a CAP or CAPA.
Thank you.
Is our acronym soup cooling off a little bit? Okay, any more questions for our collection of witnesses? I think, you know, we need to finish within 35 minutes. I'm not sure if we'll even get to House Bill 38 at all, but we could at least get this bill worked. Okay, I see no more questions. Therefore, oh, Mr. Craig has got his hand up. Okay, Mr. Craig, come on down. I think we might have to have a few of you other ones moved off to the attendee thing so I can get everybody on the screen. Mr. Craig, welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to clarify a little bit for Representative Ottman, that requirement on supervision is a Wyoming specific. Nationally, you can supervise at the bachelor's level within the scope of practice for substance use disorder. In fact, there's a credential at the national level that does require a specific training. I think it's a 40-hour course to get that certification to be considered for a clinical supervisor at the bachelor's level. It also has a number of work experience hours so that you know the person is competent to be able to provide the supervision. As I mentioned earlier, at the bachelor level and in Texas, I actually had done clinical supervision. And for many, many years, I did clinical supervision at the bachelor's level, but I can't do it here in Wyoming. That's just the state requirement here.
As you see, and further questions for Mr. Craig. I'll just say, as you see, committee members, this is a compromise. If we tried to make everybody's happy, we would have 9 different bills and none go forward. Just saying. Okay, any more questions for Mr. Craig? And I see, very good. Thank you, Mr. Craig. I see no more blue hands. So is there a motion on the bill? Moved by Hallinan. Is there a second? Seconded by Ottman. Okay. Is there any discussion on the bill? Any amendments? Representative Romero Martinez. And there you go.
I don't know if I'm speaking specific to the bill, but I'm going to throw a question out there. And maybe this is rhetorical, but it had been mentioned that there are other factors, wages, rural nature, and other bigger questions that we need to face. I'm wondering if maybe I can get some emails sent to me about those other issues, because it sounds to me, and this is just a yes or no to whoever wants to answer. I don't really, Madam Chairman. We also heard that there's a lack of resources. Is that something that we need to probably simultaneously look at? I'm not trying to say 9 bills that will all fail, but if there's something that I need to key in on with the resources and looking at the other factors, somebody shoot me an email or just make me a comment, please.
Right. So I would just say Representative Romero Martinez. So I think I would say that's not really something to amend into this bill. You know, right now we're dealing with amendments because it won't fit into it. I would certainly say, and I would suggest you and all the rest of us, when we get to the end of session, to offer interim topics. You know, for several years, we have really tried to work on what educational services we need to meet the gaps in healthcare, including mental health and substance abuse in our state. And that's something that, you know, we didn't tackle it very well this interim because of COVID and all those other things with the SHARES Act and stuff we were working on. But I totally agree with you, Representative Romero Martinez, that this is an area that we have desperate need of attention to in this state. So I would say it can't, I don't think we can't amend it into this bill because, you know, we have sort of a single subject requirement and it won't go there, but definitely put it on your to-do list for interim topic list, because we want to work some more on that. Representative Connolly, I think I saw your hand.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just a comment, and that is, I really appreciate the work and the thinking that the interim committee did and the recognition that this has been a multi-year process and a compromise. So I'm going to vote aye to move this along and do a whole lot more thinking about whether this is the best of the compromises. But again, I want to thank the committee for all of its hard work and the folks that did testify. I'll be an aye, but I still want to think about it. Thank you.
The work is not complete. You know, we're not expecting the world to end next month, and we have tidied up everything with a bow. That's all right. We'll have more to do. That's good. Representative Hallinan. Oh, you're muted still.
I'm going to be an aye on this bill also, because now there is no work requirement for these CAPAs to become CAPs. And this bill at least puts in a couple thousand hours of training that they're going to require in order to become a CAP. So with that in mind, I'm going to vote an aye on this, Madam Chairman.
Okay, any amendments? Okay, well, in that case then, Carla, would you call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The motion is due pass on House Bill 003. Representative Clifford.
Representative Clifford, aye.
Representative Conley.
Representative Connolly, aye.
Representative Flitner.
Representative Flitner, aye.
Representative Ottman.
Representative Ottman, aye.
Representative Romero Martinez.
Representative Romero Martinez, aye.
Representative Stivar.
Representative Stiver, no.
Representative Worf.
Representative Worf votes aye.
Vice Chairman Hallinan.
Vice Chairman Hallinan votes aye.
And Chairman Wilson.
Chairman Wilson votes aye.
8 ayes, 1 no.
Okay, thank you, committee. Often what happens, committee, is it's been sort of the tradition of the Labor Committee to divvy out the bills for presentation on the floor. I'm going to think further about that, and if you have a great enthusiasm, and I think that that's a great thing. What with so many new members on committee, I'm a little bit reluctant to lay a licensing bill on people to present in a virtual session. So I'm willing to take these two on myself, but if you really want them, and we're not going to give Representative Stivar House Bill 3, just let me know, and we'll see how that comes along. Okay, committee, we've got basically 25 minutes before we really have a hard stop. And because we posted this, the discussion by rule and the way leadership has set up our new committees, the idea was, if when we go into session and we've got our morning meetings, we're not going to have new bills in the afternoon other than to carry over things that were posted and not considered. What I think I would like to do is go over House Bill 38 in kind of a quick way with my presentation. And I know we do have Representative Larson, who was the chairman of the subcommittee, on, and we can maybe get his input. And then whatever state agency or public comment we can take before 12:30, we will. But we will continue working, and we may need more public comments at a different meeting. We will certainly not have time to work the bill at this time. But I want to just go ahead and at least make good use of our remaining 25 minutes. And I think it will give you folks time to really contemplate this and hear what we've been trying to do. So Vice Chairman Hallinan, I'm not sure that I'm necessarily going to even have time for you to take questions, but if there are questions, I'll let you chair that anyway. So for right now, I'm just going to start House Bill 38, Community Behavioral Health Priority Populations. The genesis of this was Management Council last spring, when Management Council was giving out topics. The Appropriations Committee had put on their request list to look at prioritizing the state general fund dollars that we give to community mental health centers. As you all know, we have budgetary challenges, and they really wanted to do their own prioritization. From the Labor Committee, we kind of managed to squirm our way onto that topic, and I'm very thankful for that. Those of you who are new will perhaps not realize the hazard that might happen with appropriations tackling subject matter without somebody else's input. So we had 4 House members and 4 senators, 2 from Labor on each side and 2 from Appropriations on each side. We took testimony throughout the summer from providers in the community as far as prioritizations. We, just kind of went through some various thinking exercises as legislators. We also took into consideration the past, again, several years worth of work on criminal justice reform that the legislature has been doing. Had started off in judiciary and then moved on to the Labor Committee. The challenges that we have in helping people who end up in the corrections system not keep recycling through there. And one of the big challenges that we've discovered over the last few years has been particularly substance abuse needs, mental health needs as well, but particularly substance abuse challenges, and how to get those services in the correction system itself, how to have there be what we kind of call a warm handoff to the community providers. And we felt very strongly that we needed to be able to continue with that work. So that's all the background to this. So I'm going to just skip. I'm really going to go through kind of quickly to make sure that we've got time. The bottom of page 1, you'll see a sunset feature, which I will come back to. But I want to make some various points. We have 2 separate sections of statute here. On the bottom of page 2, we pick up with Title 25, which is the statute having to do with involuntary commitment. So a person who appears to be trying to harm themselves or harm other people can be involuntarily committed, and they go out to the state hospital in Evanston or various other, we have some other places if the Evanston is full. I mean, there's a whole lot of background on all of that, which I won't really get into. But so part of this bill just addresses some of that. And you will see during session, Judiciary has done some independent work with the county attorneys that is tweaking this. I think we have managed to not actually have anything collide in our tweaks. I won't spend too much time on the Title 25 part. what you see, a lot of the red wording on page 3 and page 4 and page 5 is the effect of the sunset clause, because the sunset clause really flows throughout the bill. And so that's where all that wording says, well, between 2022 and 2026, these things happen. And then the sunset clause that was amended in at the end of the interim committee comes into effect. Okay, beginning on page 5, here we pick up Title 35. And this is the section that deals with the duties of the Department of Health regarding mental health, substance abuse, developmental disabilities, also some sexual assault type things and that sort of thing, which are not really addressed in this deal. So the only thing that's really happening here on page 5, line 18, we're inserting not just a blanket provide prevention and treatment, but serve priority populations. So this is a big difference. And there's been some discussion about this for quite a number of years, really, since I was in the legislature. Is the purpose of the general fund money at the state to provide general access across the state for people who want marriage counseling, counseling for your rebellious teenager, people with psychosis? I mean, is it to do everything? And that's kind of what it's been up to what they made available. Or are we going to put a priority list in place? And that is just inserted there. You'll also see on line 20, and this carries throughout, just an upgrade up of the language from substance abuse to substance use disorder. You know, things get changed in all these services periodically. So on page 6, that's just that throughout there. Page 7, in the notice that this is just definitions. This is not the priority part. This is just definitions. We're defining mental illness. So if you're addicted to drugs, that is not a mental illness. That's something separate. We're just changing the definition there. Page 7, line 13 is the beginning here. And again, this is in definitions. This will be for later involvement in the prioritization. But we have one category, which is called adults with acute mental illness. So these are people who would be subject to an involuntary hospitalization, or they've been released from having been involuntarily hospitalized. So in other words, people who would have harmed themselves or others are either have been at risk for that, or they're on their way out. We considered that this is going to be a category when we develop the priority list. This is one group, and how we've defined that. Then on line 22, we picked up another paragraph. This was an amendment in committee, adults with severe mental illness. And you'll just notice these definitions. Interesting. So I wrote this definition looking at SAMHSA, the Federal Substance Abuse Mental Health people. The sort of mental health definitions they're not well defined. I mean, there's a lot of these terms are kind of sloshy and people haven't really pinned them down. And so this was, I was hoping, well, I'll just find a definition, but I didn't find one. So I wrote it. So what we're trying to address here is adults with severe mental illness, people who, based on diagnosis and history, I'm turning the page, have a substantial probability of being unable to meet their needs for food, shelter, and medical care if they do not receive regular mental health treatment or case management. So why we put this in is because as the bill originally came out of the subcommittee, you almost had to have been involuntarily hospitalized before you could get help. And we thought, well, that's not a good, I mean, it'd be far better if you take people who have severe mental illness, but through good case management, through people helping them stay on their meds, can stay in the community, have their housing, have some type of employment maybe. And so let's not make people fall into the pit before they get help. So we're inserting these people who with help can be stable. Then there's a definition for behavioral health center. That's just really an upgrade with some federal thing from mental health and substance abuse. Mental health and substance abuse is now kind of turned into behavioral health. That's just a diagnosis. Then we had a lengthy discussion, and I think many of you were on that last meeting in December, families at high risk. So this is where we've got situations with children, and I'm kind of combining the 3 paragraphs. You can look at them a little bit more later, where we have children who are at risk of either being removed from their home, So that's where they've been discharged from a psychiatric residential treatment facility. That's paragraph A. Paragraph B, they're being referred for treatment of a mental illness to prevent removing the child from the home. Or C, there's a mental illness or substance use disorder in the child's life, and we need to treat them to prevent the child from ending up in the judicial system. So that's, as you well remember, that we had a lengthy discussion about how broad to make that. Should we bring in all the family members, or are we really, so that right now those paragraphs are basically focused on the child. Then we have two more definitions down at the bottom of page 9, general access clients. So in other words, people who want marriage counseling, but there's no psychologist in their county, let's say. Can they go in and say, I want to hit my spouse over the head with a frying pan because he's so annoying? Well, is that a priority, or is that at the bottom of the list? Whatever. I'm making these people up. There's no such people. At bottom of the page, indigent general access clients. So these are people who don't have insurance and whose total household income is not more than 150%. So just for your information, that would be one per, if the person lives by themselves, $19,140 a year. That's 150%. A family of 4, it's $39,300. That is just, we had that discussion again. What's the bar at which people can or cannot end up, do they have insurance? Can they get it through the exchange? There was a lot of discussion on that. Okay, turning the page, top of page 10, indigent clients with high needs. So you're low income, but you are not in the justice system. You're not so handicapped that you won't find food or housing, but line 5 substantially impairs their ability to function. That's a rather fine definition, between those things. But again, remember, the origin of this whole thing is when the state is short of money, how do we say with our general fund dollars, keeping in mind, and we'll see next or later, that if these are basically the clinics that Ms. Somerville is the executive director of. There's a clinic in each one of the counties, and they provide these services, and they get a block grant from us. They can certainly get money from other places. They can bill Medicaid. They can, if the person goes in and they've got TRICARE or Blue Cross, they can bill them. So we're not saying you are prohibited from helping other people. We're just saying with the general fund dollars you get, this is the priority. And we'll see that listed later. Okay, page 10, we've got various definitions further of non-state level justice involved. And all we're doing here is, so we've got, is the person involved in Department of Corrections? Do you have to wait until they go to Rawlins? What if they've only been through municipal court 10 times and the judge is like, hey, bud, I'm tired of seeing you. Okay, that's the non-state justice involved. So, all those people. What we're trying to do with some of this is not make people have to get to the farthest worst level before we can help them. And let's see, page 11, priority population means. So this is our definition of priority population. Now we've got A through G, turning the page, and you'll just see later that this is in order. And we'll pick that up. You might put yourself a little post-it on this page or something like that, so you can find it again. And I'm trying to, okay, I got 10 minutes. All right, page 12, section or title 35. Again, we have authorization for counties. Counties are an arm of the state, so they can only do things that we tell them they can do, basically. And we're just putting some words into their language about behavioral health centers. That goes through page 13. That's not really a significant change, I don't think. Page 14 is just behavioral health centers and page 15 for the most of it is, again, just language changes. Page 15, the bottom half, you'll see more things here. And again, this is really just rephrasing. It's really not changed. They are supposed to have payment policies. They have that now. you can see like line 19, take into account a client's ability to pay. We're just really rewording that. But, you know, so there should be a sliding scale. If the person is absolutely broke versus if the person's making $35,000 a year, you know, you can make different charges. That's kind of a normal thing. Page 16. All right, here's the big where we say, okay, this is the prioritization. Page 16, we've got here tier 1, and what tier 1 is, you can see it's got the letters on there back to where your post-it is. Tier 1 is the justice involved people, the high-risk families, and adults with acute or severe mental illness. Tier 2 would be indigent high needs. So in other words, the almost severe but not quite. Tier 3 would be the indigent general access. So in other words, if you have insurance and you want marriage counseling, you might be able to get your service through here if they are not full, but you're really at the bottom of the list. Okay, page 17. Now, this is a lot of wording in here. Lines 5 through 6, you see the words shall provide essential subsidy payments. Line 9, continuing operating costs. What we're getting at here is some of these counties that are very rural, they may not have the population of, let's say, criminal justice involved people to spend 80% of their time on that. And you might need to give them, and we do this with small school districts, you might need to give them a little bit extra in a subsidy to just keep the doors open and rolling to serve these other people. We're just taking into consideration the challenges of rural areas with not that many clients. That's what we're trying to do there. Page 18 clarifies on line 7 that they can use sources other than state fundings. I mean, they don't really need that statute. I mean, they can do that without us anyway, but it was the concern of the previous interim committee that we wanted to make it be very clear that we weren't saying you can't do anything other than the money we give you. You can do what you want with other money you get, just not with the money we're giving you. And let's see, just a little bit of, pages 19, 20, some vocabulary changing, nothing really significant. Top of 22, you'll see there's some repealers. And the only discussion we had really was on line 2351622B. There was a previous requirement for a local match. There was some discussion about that. How can you really require people that are private operators and can do what they want to limit how much matches they have or not? The other things were fairly old language, asking the state to comment on applications, to evaluate things, which we're obviously doing under contract, clarifying confidentiality of records, which has kind of been overtaken by HIPAA. I mean, you hardly need, so they were just trying to clean that up. Section 4 is pretty important, and I can see I have very few minutes left. This is a follow-on part. The Department of Health shall consult, okay, on line 9, regarding the reform and redesign of the programs. Line 14, setting up eligibility requirements. Line 20, eligibility requirements for receipt of essential subsidy payments that we talked about. On page 23, line 7, a pay for performance methodology. That line 11, rewards providers for administering case management. Line 16, prevention of hospitalization. Line 19, prevention of reincarceration. And page 24, lines 1 and 4, employment and housing. Now, the contracts that the Department of Health has with these organizations essentially covers this, but the feeling of the group was that as we move forward to really have the voice of the legislature and of providers and of clients to identify how we can best set up community mental health programming. A lot of this language came into being in the 90s. Maybe we really need to revisit, get our arms around the whole system, identify how do we reward in contract what we are looking for from the places that are receiving our block grants. Then on line 16, we have a report next summer. We're supposed to hear back on this. And that's pretty much it. Now, I just want to circle back to the sunset date issue on page 1, at line 13, and picking up on line 2. At the end of committee, and I'll ask Representative Stivar to maybe take a minute on this. At the end of our last committee, there was a lot of discussion from some of the members of the committee about whether we were really happy with this prioritization. And so there was a motion by Representative Stivar which succeeded to have a sunset date. I will just say that as LSO, as we've looked at this later with the sunset date, the challenge with the sunset date as it is in there, because it was kind of a conceptual amendment, is that basically the entire community mental health program will sunset in 2026, which I suspect is not what Representative Stivar wanted to happen, although he can speak for himself. I'm thinking what we wanted to do was require us to have to revisit the prioritization. So I will just tell you now that I have drafted an amendment, and I'll let Representative Stivar speak in just a minute. I have drafted an amendment to take out that sunset part and put it into that section 4, where we put the requirement on the Department of Health to make them come back to us with a prioritization discussion in that same time frame, so that we will have to review that. But I hate to leave it up to a legislature 5 years from now to remember to actually recreate the whole state community mental health program, which you never know where there's a slip there. Representative Stivar, do you want to throw anything in on your intention as far as the sunset date there?
Yes, Madam Chairman. I'm still a no vote on this bill. There's too much stuff into this, and I'm afraid once the Department of Health and that Department of Government gets their hands on this, it's not going to be the intended consequences we're thinking it's going to be. That's why I put the sunset date on it. This needs to be looked at to make sure that it's what we're looking and what this bill's intention, because the unintended consequences of this is going to be bad.
So thank you, Representative Stivar. So just to point out, and I value his input there. If, as the bill goes forward, if we don't take out the sunset date, within 5 years, we will have no community mental health program. And I'm not sure that that is a good thing, but that's my argument, and Representative Stivar can have his too. We have 4 minutes. Representative Larson, have you got 4 minutes worth of input that he wants to just give us, Representative Stivar, while he's signing in?
Yes, that's the thing, is it's not to get rid of the mental health altogether. That's not what the sunset date was about. It was so we could go and make sure it was done, if this does pass, of what was the consequences this bill was supposed to make.
Right, and I understand that, and I'm okay with that. It's just that the way that the sunset date ended up in the bill basically repeals this whole title, and that was, anyway. We'll talk further because obviously we're going to roll on. Representative Larson, you got 3 minutes.
Well, and I don't have to speak at all if you prefer. I don't.
Give us your 3 minutes. Representative Larson was the House chair of this subcommittee, and he served on the Labor Committee for 4 years and has now been on appropriations for 4 years, going on to 5th. So speaks from both sides. Go ahead.
Madam Chairman and members of the committee, particularly you new members of the committee, what you really have to understand is we've been having a discussion on mental health since I've been in the legislature, and perhaps just a little bit before that. And if you went and dove into the statutes, you will find that there is no clear policy outlining what the state's role for providing mental health to the citizens of the state is. This bill, as it comes before you in the first round, establishes that policy, and it says that the state does have a responsibility to provide mental health, and the reason for it, which is to divert people from state facilities and to prevent them from going back into state facilities like the state hospital or corrections or things of that nature. I hope that you will look at this because it really does establish what we would expect the state to do. It's not really based upon where we're at in this current economic condition. This was before we had that. This only exasperates the problem. And so once we have a policy, we can fund it accordingly. But without a policy, we just throw money to the wind, and it makes it very, very difficult. So I hope as you consider this over the next few weeks and as you read through it, please feel free to give me a call, give me an email. I can give you more history on this. We've worked with departments as well as the WAMSAC people to kind of get this outlined and in hope that we can help you better understand it. So as you work it in March or when you do next, that you feel comfortable with the bill as it is and feel like you can make an educated vote.
Okay, I'm not even going to take questions for Representative Larson because we're going to be very unlabor-like and actually adjourn on time. 12:29. Woo! Probably the first time in the last 8 years. No. Okay, committee. I know LSO has got to go off and supervise some other meetings. So, it's a weighty bill. It's got a lot of history behind it. There's a lot of things going on. Feel free to reach out to your local community mental health providers or your local folks who are involved in corrections. That's certainly part of what research you can do as far as the discussion on what gets provided and what we're aiming to do and how we hope things will work. And to all of those of you who are so kindly sitting out there in the attendee land, I regret that we are done for the day. We will put this bill on the agenda when I'm not sure exactly of our timing in the February committee meetings, but we will be back on and hear more testimony on this bill and move forward. So committee, thanks very much. I'll see you all next Wednesday when we gavel in for session, and we will have House Bill 4 and House Bill 3 hopefully hit general file, and you'll get to see how that all works. All right, have a good week and a good weekend, everybody.
I'll run
Thank
through.
you.